accounts. Yep, that's okay. Okay. Okay, now we'll choose recording. We're going to go.
Okay, perfect. So good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for making it here today. The challenges on our roading network, which just wait for next week when we get all the school holidays happening. New definition of the word fun and very relevant to our infrastructure strategy session today. Also welcome those who are joining online and those who will be watching this subsequently. Good session today, a lot of detail. That was my sort of takeaway from running through the slide pack and yesterday. And I think it's fair to say, this is a high level approach to quite a complex set of strategy levers. And I'm hoping that at the end of it, or not at the end of this session, but at the end of this approach, we'll have some better understanding of, if we make these assumptions, is what the consequences are on our infrastructure spend or whatever. I think so for me, we'll run through the stuff to see how the conversation goes. Just flagging up that we will, because some of this direction we may be asked to give, we won't know what the consequences in the real world of that is until we see the list of projects or whatever. So if we're looking at our appetite for risk or our spending range, it is high level, and we won't know what that means for Avon in Kingston or whatever. So I think it might not be until we see some of those consequences that we go, oh, well, actually, that wasn't really what we want to achieve. So we need to come back and revisit some of these assumptions that we're being asked to get in direction of today. So that's my opening. I think there's a lot of detail. I think it's told for those who were here for the last long-term plan. It's quite a different approach. So let's see how we go. I'm going to pass over to staff. Thank you.
Morning. I think Ian's going to kick us off first.
Probably just going to lightly just hand over to Penny, but but I think that's a great introduction actually. So this is obviously the much awaited commencement of the 30th of June steering group, built up here by Penny to a lofty height. But yeah, absolutely. So the purpose of today is to start off by making sure that we really understand the growth assumptions and the growth model that's underpinning the rest of the the developing infrastructure strategy, because that's super fundamental in terms of understanding that those really core base assumptions. And then there are 6 areas of the infrastructure strategy. We're going to look to cover off 3 of those today: asset management and renewals, climate adaptation and resilience, environment and natural infrastructure. Then we'll tackle waste minimisation and management and social infrastructure next week. And transport will be part of the full council workshop on the 14th of July, alongside the
Strategic network plan and the funding model work from Southern Infrastructure.
Yeah. And then I think, to your point, absolutely, this is very much the understanding the investment appetite, the risk appetite, and for us seeking the direction in that regard. And then in terms of, and I'll run through the plan of SGs at the end. Then importantly, we take away the information from these 3 workshops, and then we're back to you with that detailed list of projects on the 16th of August. And then we have a couple of SGs to iterate through that exact list. So this is all really about creating the foundations for what those lists can look like.
If I may just want to add a little bit more flavour to the start. John's already alluded to the fact that this is quite a different approach than we've taken before. The reason for that is because historically we've been able to take a slightly more linear approach because we know the shape and form, at least, of local government going forward, let alone the projects that we then want to deliver on and the services we want to provide. We're not really in that world at the moment. There's a lot of uncertainty out there. So we're trying to think in terms of scenarios that enable you to make choices and to see the implications of those choices as we go through the process. So I appreciate that this is a complex conversation we're about to have here. Ordinarily, we would try and engineer some of the complexity out so that we are discussing something that's maybe a little simpler, but we'd actually really like to share that complexity with the governance on this occasion because there are so many different approaches that might need to be taken into the future. So for some of you, this may not be your happiest place to be in the complexity. Some of you I know will absolutely love it. But as we step through in this process and get a bit of steering, a bit of guidance from yourselves, we will simplify and iterate as we go forward and take you through the journey.
Excellent. Right. Good morning. So I think just building on what Michelle and John said, this is the first of 3 conversations we're going to have about in the infrastructure strategy space before we move into the detailed project planning. And this is, we're taking you on the journey of our iterative work that leads to building up that program. So some of you will be wanting to know what it means in terms of how much it's going to cost, what are the projects. These are all of the things that we are taking into account in order to get to that position. So we don't know what that list looks like yet because we need to have this direction from you. So as Michelle highlighted, we haven't done it quite this way in the past. So there is a bit of kind of learn as we go. And so just would ask for some sympathy with the process in terms of we're learning with you, trying to be responsive to you wanting to be involved in the direction setting and the process, but it means you don't get all the information that you want because that comes further down the track. And it's not that we're not giving it to you. We haven't got to, we have some idea because we already have an existing long-term plan, we have existing strategies, that's what's feeding into this, but it's not like we're kind of holding that back. This is all part of the process that we need to go through with you to get to what that investment program looks like. So what we're going to focus on today is what we're calling confirming the planning settings is what we're calling it. So these are the kind of overarching things that then feed through into the more specific deliverables and aspirations in each of the activity areas. So what we're going to be talking about today is growth, resilience, including climate adaptation, environment and asset renewal. So all of those have a flow-through effect on the into the activity areas, being transport, social infrastructure broadly, but which we're breaking down into natural infrastructure and community facilities, if you like, which includes parks and open spaces, and waste minimisation and management. So these will also flow through into, we hope, into the water services strategy, because these are more kind of macro planning settings for the district, and they flow through into other infrastructure developer plans as well. So for example, in relation to growth and resilience, well, actually in relation to all of these, they also would flow through and connect with the NZTA program for the district, and vice versa. So when you see that, when we have the transport session, some of that is influenced by NZTA settings in the same space. But growth, for example, we want everybody to be working off the same growth assumptions. So the growth scenarios here flow through into education, health, across the infrastructure types, not just our infrastructure. So what we are wanting to do today is to get some we've put forward a few options in each of these areas. We want some direction from you as to which of those options is the one that you feel like we should be aspiring to, working towards as we do our planning. There are dollars attached to those, but they're not dollars that you should add up and go, therefore the total is X, because these are cross-cutting and there is some overlap between them. The dollars are really included to try and give you an indication of the quantum impact of the choices that you make. So if you decided to, that the direction you give us is at this end of the spectrum, so that you can see the quantum of investment greater than if you give us direction at this end of the spectrum. But that still has to be translated into the actual activity investment plans. So what we'll then do over the next two sessions is come back to you with the actual activity, same kind of thing. We'll show pathways, strategic direction, ask for some direction, and that then flows through into the detailed planning. So any questions on that before we go on? Okay, sorry. I've got it. Sorry, we just need to
Technical difficulties.
Yep. So I'm going to talk through this. So for each of these areas, we've got some options. We want to discuss those and then get some direction from you that then flows through to what we're doing in the next couple of sessions. So this is not in this document is not a PowerPoint presentation. So I'm going to kind of flip through it as we're talking. I'm assuming you've all read it, but we're just going to talk through the logic as we work through it. In some areas, people might talk to specific pages, but yeah, there's a lot of information on some of these pages. It's more of a kind of background report to inform the discussion rather than a PowerPoint presentation. So I apologise for some of the ones that have detail on the screen. So I'll look at this. These are the 4 areas. So what we're wanting to do in each of these areas. So in relation to growth, what is the growth profile and pattern that forms the basis of our infrastructure planning? In terms of resilience, what level of resilience are we targeting? In terms of thriving Te Tau, what are our environmental aspirations in relation to infrastructure that can be influenced by us? And what is our asset management philosophy and how does that then flow through? So what we'll do now is we'll go through each of those areas and we'll have Anita talking to growth, Bill will talk to resilience, we'll talk through resilience and thriving Te Tau, and then Ellie will talk to asset stewardship. So this has been a real team effort, as you will see. This won't just be the Penny and Jessie show like last time. As we work through this, you're going to be hearing from all the different people who are, actually involved in the strategy and planning for these areas as we move through this week's and the next two as well. So I'll hand over to Anita now, who will talk to growth. So before we do that though, anyone got any questions, comments on the approach?
We will just pause at the end of each section and capture directions and replay them.
Sure. You agree with that? Just look at, I love the layout. There is a lot of detail, but that's good. There's a lot of stuff here. In the why we do it sections, doesn't it grab me that it's identified what is statutorily required and what's discretionary. Some of the things are really important, but we don't have to do them. We're choosing to do them. Was there a conscious decision to not include that sort of distinction? Or are we going to have to reach that as we go?
So the planning, in terms of these planning sessions, the things we have to do, we have to do. So what we're talking to you about here is we're trying to highlight the things that, so in growth, Anita will talk to the fact that actually planning to respond to the projected growth is mandatory.
Sure.
So it's not a thing that we have choices about how we respond, but not that we respond. In terms of the other areas, from a strategy, high level kind of direction setting perspective, we have to do the things we have to do.
Yeah.
How we respond to those comes through generally in the more detailed capital planning sections, except for growth. So I think this is a really, this discussion should be focused on where we have choices, as opposed to, we're not highlighting you must do this and you have choices here. We're just focusing on the things where you can give us direction to flow through into that next stage. When you see the next stage, you will see in the capital program, these are the things we don't have choices about. These are the things you do have choices about.
That'll do it for now. Thank you.
Okay, got one
Nikki has a
question,
question as well.
question from Nikki.
Not so much a question, just a quick comment. Just National Policy Statement for Urban Development. We do have to deliver, what's the phraseology, well functioning urban environments?
Yep.
There are limits. If we can't, then there are question marks. So I just want to, you know, we're told the legislation tells us we have to do this. There are some caveats. There are some things that if we can't deliver, then maybe we're not able to deliver on that amount of growth, because obviously, you know, the infrastructure that we provide enables growth as well. And so there's, you know, our growth projections are based on the past and the infrastructure provided and by us and developers. So I don't think it's cut and dried. And I just wanted to say that. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So essentially just holding on what Penny just said, yeah, growth planning is not optional, it's a mandatory requirement. There are some caveats, as Nikki just mentioned, but essentially all the legislation directs us to plan for growth. In particular, we had some changes to the Resource Management Act, and through the National Policy Statement, we have to supply adequate land for housing and business land, and we need to meet those demands. The National Policy Statement for Urban Development also directs us to provide a buffer, a 20% buffer over the short, medium term, and then a 15% buffer over the long term. And what's happening through recent changes is that it's becoming more explicit. There's a really strong tie between that planning for growth and making sure we have sufficient infrastructure to enable that growth to happen. We're also required to do that through the Local Government Act. I suppose because we're grappling with growth all the time, you know, growth is a challenge, but it's also a really amazing opportunity for our district too. So there are both challenges and opportunities that come with that growth, and I think that's something to keep in mind when we're thinking about it. So essentially, we've been one of the fastest growing districts in New Zealand. You know, over the last 30 years, we've increased by nearly 40,000 people. We've had an annual growth rate of 4.6%, and that equates to around, you know, 1,400 people a year moving to us with peaks and troughs. Before COVID, we had quite high immigration. Majority of our growth is from migration. So it's 20% birth deaths, but 80% of our growth is happening traditionally from Auckland, Australia, and across the world. We're a popular place to come, you know, live, work, and visit. So as you can see, for a significant amount of time, Stats New Zealand have unprojected our growth, and that's something we've been grappling with and working with them for a number of years. Go to the next one. Oh no, sorry. There we go. So what we did is, because of this high growth rate, what we actually did is we worked with BG Patterson and Utility Limited, who have done our demand projections, and what we asked Stats New Zealand to do is to do a customised projection for us. What we said is we would like you to look at the historical growth rates, and we would like to project that moving forward. So what we've said, what they've done is they've looked at how we have grown and they've projected that moving forward. So we've had some customised data projections. So what that shows is between 2024 and 28, we're projecting about 10,000 residents, and then that sort of petering out to 8,000 every 5 years after that. So that is quite high compared to what we've done in the past. But what we decided to do is just to keep looking at how we have grown and projecting that out. So that customised projection has actually informed our updated demand projections. So what we're seeing is a much higher growth rate than we've ever predicted before.
So how does that compare to our own projections that we've made through the spatial plan and all that sort of stuff? Is this a new number that we're using?
Yep, it is a new number. And when you look at the Stats High projections, they are our 2025. So when we released our 2025 projections, they were higher than Stats New Zealand High, and then Stats High have now moved up, and they're essentially matching our projections.
I was going to say, so this is in line with our assumptions based on all the other stuff we've done.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're essentially having
So have they
customised projections to replace our.
So they sort of validated our work, basically.
Well, no, they've released the customised projections, so they will still do their own projections. But what we are saying is, look, we've looked back in the past. We have grown much higher than we've ever predicted. So we think we're going to continue doing that. So what we've said is, with these customised projections, can we look at build that into the projection? So that is a customised projection. So at the end of the
so we've got a reasonable amount of confidence that it aligns with our work, that they've sort of come to terms with what the real world looks like?
Well, that's still a work in progress. And so the way that we're looking at these projections is to look at them as two scenarios. So you're looking at, and so then we're in the monitoring.
It's
So
a range.
the range. So instead of being fixated to say, you know, for example, we build a treatment plant and we're building it till 2048. Instead of saying that, we're building a treatment plant for a capacity of an additional 40,000 houses, right? Now that could happen in the next 20 or 60 years. We're going to monitor that and keep up to date. And so by monitoring, we can track how we've grown and can say, if we track it against our long-term plan and say, actually, look, Te Tapuai has grown way quicker than we predicted. What does that mean for the next LTP? Do we have to bring things forward? Or do we have to do deals with the developers?
I've always said that there's nothing more certain than the fact our projections will be wrong. It's just the quantum by which they'll be wrong by.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, so that, I mean, just to,
so this is
you sort of indicated that, you know, it would grow like this and then flatten out. But I mean,
no.
why would we? Well, you said you dropped from 10,000 to 8,000, but I mean, no, is that a reasonable assumption to make?
Yeah.
Because it never has, and we always do this. We always go, oh, it's gonna do this, and then it sort of never does.
Well,
So
I mean, I'm not a demographer,
Yeah.
but I'm a statistician. So, but we've looked at it, and I think it's reasonable to assume when you look at international rates, there is potentially a slowing down. And I mean, this is just based off the best data we have. So average, we were showing about 1350. Our projections moving forward are about just under 2,000. So that's much higher than we ever had. And I think that's more realistic. Now, if we start growing way quicker than that, that's when our monitoring kicks in and we say, hang on, we need to readjust. But I think having the range is helpful and also thinking about the end rate of capacity. So we're looking at this is what likely to happen. This is the overall capacity. What happens is it's quicker or slower. So it's just a different way of looking at it. So instead of being fixated by a point in time, we can be more agile in that space.
And we've got to respond to the signals, if you like. But I'm just a signal though that I think we've made that mistake many times. I'm just cautious about the idea, and we do it with rates increases and all sorts of things where we think it's going to go like this and then like this, and it just. I think we've got to be super cautious about that.
I think we also, I mean, there's as much danger as over projecting too. You know, we've got instances of councils around New Zealand who have done lots of things and it's caused massive significant issues. So I think by looking at this, if we look at the historic trend of 1350, it's average of 19, you know, just under 2,000, I think, and this is much higher. We've tested it with a couple of other external parties and they've said, you know, this is probably a more realistic rate. But if we do see those changes, we just readjust.
So Anita, the 1350 is the actual number that we've increased by, not the previous projections. Because what happens, according to the demographers that we talked to about this, is the bigger the population gets, the percentage, the percentage staying the same means that we would be growing by huge numbers. And actually we haven't, so we've tried to base it on the actual number of people. Well, not we haven't, the demographers who've been doing this work have done that. And so there's only so many houses that can be delivered. There's only so many, you know, so there's a balance of a whole lot of factors in there. But the monitoring approach, which is the new thing, this is a new approach where we will be looking at this regularly and adjusting, and the infrastructure planning will be, as Anita said, looking at, you know, we're doing a thing to meet a population of this, and then we are looking at how quickly that's going to happen so that when we need to do the next investment, which is that's a maturing of the approach. I mean, that is kind of how water infrastructure is planned anyway, but it's just not always transparent at this level that that's how it is planned.
Sorry to be a little bit of an arithmetic geek here, but this is actually compounding. This is not an average over time. So in fact, we've been compounding every year. So the amount is growing every year. So using an average rate per year, taking the next 30 years and dividing it by 30 years is wrong. What's right is compounding it, because we're compounding, and I'm going back to 1996, and I've done all the population figures. We've compounded every year. So the amount that grows incrementally every year, correct?
Yeah, so
But it can't keep.
But the average is just an easy way to look at it.
Yeah,
right?
but if you look at the table, there's table one in you can actually see the numbers. So,
Right.
you know, you can see the peaks and troughs. So, I mean, the highest we've ever grown was back in, I think it was 2023, 3,800. But, you know, there's some years, last year 900, 2021, you know, 200, 400. So there's sort of peaks and troughs. And what it shows is that as a district, we're really highly affected by what's happening internationally, and that kind of makes sense because of the migration that we're seeing. So the GFC impacted us, COVID impacted us, but then COVID impacted us in the opposite direction, because in 2023 we saw a boom because we become suddenly really attractive. So when you look at the figures, at no point down there does it show that we've increased by like 6,000 a year that would have to maintain. So what this average does is saying, okay, looking back here, we've had some slightly higher than 2,000, but what we're predicting based on the best available data, based on what we're seeing in our market, we think that this is probably the best estimate we can do moving forward. I mean, the thing with estimates is they are estimates, and that's why the monitoring of it becomes so fundamental in this process.
Is it, that's one of them. Is there a, I mean, obviously this is all going to fall out to what we spend.
Yeah.
And, you know, understanding what are we spending that is driven by growth. Is there a rate of growth that means we actually can't physically service it? We can't get the pipes in the ground quick enough. We can't deal with everything else, you know. So because money aside, which is a big if, you know, what are the actual constraints, the labour workforce, you know, the planning, the consenting, the, you know, the scheduling? Is there a rate of growth at which we know basically we can't keep up with?
So I think that is different depending on the infrastructure that you're talking about. So if you think about water supply, wastewater infrastructure, that infrastructure, when you build it, releases huge capacity that then lasts for a long time, or you specifically build it in tranches to release capacity for time, then you can release more. And so it's not as simple as, because you don't have to build the infrastructure as you grow. You have to build it in advance of the growth. For some infrastructure, for other infrastructure, it lags. So next week, when we talk about Simon's community infrastructure, for example, that's an area where, not arguably, actually, we have not delivered infrastructure that supports the growth that has happened. But the growth can still happen without it. So it's quite a complex kind of mesh of things. But with water infrastructure, yes, that would get to a point, if growth keeps happening and you haven't built it, it can't keep happening, because you actually can't put houses where there's no infrastructure. But that's where this is what the government's approach is attempting to do with fast tracks and things like the IFFA changes and those kinds of things, is opening up the ability for third parties and developers to build their own infrastructure so that they can make housing available without having to be reliant on our ability to deliver that infrastructure. So, but we'll get into that in the
South Cody,
Thanks. I appreciate you as a finance guy addressing compounding interest. It's a really relevant point. But no, I mean, I really support the change from projections to capacity, because I think one's really speculative. It's talking about, you know, predicting the future, which is a lot like interest rates. Even, you know, the best investors and, you know, Wall Street guys can't predict what other, you know, global things will happen. Capacity availability expresses the limits, it's monitoring and it's real. And I think when we've talked to developers, that they're like, you can genuinely start selling tickets for what capacity you have for certain areas. What we're finding is, you know, the Prime Minister came to Hawea on Friday and talked about future planning and referenced Singapore as a great example. The big difference with Singapore is they're quite authoritarian, they own all the land. And they're able to, you know, create a digital twin and a master plan that's fully constrained by the government, not by free markets. The irony is we've got free markets are jumping in, you know, trying to add housing to an initiative in order to make it free market. Work for smart growth. So I guess in that domain, the legislative direction, if you're looking at any of those bills, it's sort of quite important for us to have the legal tools in order to be the limiting factor, I guess, in the monitoring aspect. So when it comes to advocacy, I'd imagine more of the Resource Management Act or Planning Bill is going to be the ticket to do it. But I guess it's just highlighting that framework of thinking is going to be, I guess, the most effective to communicate that up. At the moment, we've got this dissonance between what central and local government think future planning looks like. So, yeah, but just to reiterate, I really support the capacity availability. In my mind, I want to look at sort of a dashboard that goes, there's the roading capacity, social infrastructure, water infrastructure, the other stuff, and go, you know, we've got 25% left on here, then, you know, who can deliver it for us at 25%? And then it means if we're wrong, it doesn't matter. You know, trying to predict 30 years away is a bit of an art. That's kind of useless anyway. So, yeah, I'd rather talk about capacity, and then as it's met, we're able to address it. And if it's not, then it's not over investing.
So that actually addresses, I think, John's question, and this is what we're going to be talking about in the Smart Growth workshop next week. So anyone's interested, come along. The approach to actually how do we articulate what the deficit is, what capacity gets released as we invest certain things, and then what's the cumulative impact of growth, including the fast tracks, on our networks at a macro level. So, you know, you've seen that work we did on transport, but building that out a bit more, looking at the other layers of infrastructure. Water is way more complicated, but that would be one that we would want to try and build into that. Certainly, I think those of you who've seen, I think it has come to you, Helen and Mark come and spoken about the water supply and wastewater network plans and strategy. That's all kind of based on how do you build up those networks in a way that responds appropriately to growth, looking at capacity, compliance, in a kind of, you know, in a strategic way. So they've planned that out, but what we don't have is a visual way, like a dashboard, to be able to actually show that. But that would definitely be an aspiration for the future.
Yeah, so I've written it down, and it keeps coming up, deficit dashboard.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah, because you asked for that. We clocked that. That was asked for. That's part of what we're talking about, Smart Growth anyway.
And I mean, I think it's important to not ignore the fact that our biggest constraint we don't control.
Yeah.
Because the state highway network, and you know, look, half the people in the room experienced it today.
Yeah.
Is our biggest constraint, and we don't control it. So we've got to be super careful about how we deal with that in terms of capacity, notwithstanding that our current housing capacity assessment doesn't even consider transport as a constraint, as infrastructure. So we just need to be real about that.
Actually, what's ironic is all of those those statutory settings on us to respond to growth don't apply to government's provision of infrastructure, which is why we're trying to work out what our advocacy approach is for that cumulative impact for the government.
Because I mean, some of our spending will be conditional, right? At the end of the day, it has to be conditional. There's no point us doing this if these things that we can't control are absolutely necessary.
We have to play hardball on that because we have to say, well, we can't do this unless you do that.
So I'm going to move this on because I think we could spend 3 hours.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, we've made that point. Let's run on to the different models.
Oh, Nikki, didn't
Oh, sorry, Nikki.
Look, don't worry. I'm just backing up John and Quentin. At the end of the day, there are hard limits on transport, and we can't achieve well-functioning urban environments if the government doesn't do its bit. So, yeah. End of.
The only point I just add is when we updated, so with the customised projections, we have worked quite closely with our supplier, and we've looked at where we have grown, we've built in developer intentions, and we've looked at capacity, and so that's how we've allocated the demand projections. So we've looked at it quite in a lot more detail than we've ever done before. So essentially just building on what we had is these scenarios are a little bit different to the rest of the options that you are having. So essentially, we've built a growth model, or Cam and my team has built a growth model. And what it gives us the ability is to test different scenarios of growth, and then how that would impact on our infrastructure investment. But not only that, also our plan-enabled capacity and our spatial plan capacity that we have built in. So essentially, it just allows us to test what would happen if we grew a different way to what we were forecasting, and what happens if we bring certain things forward. So essentially, we've built in 4 scenarios. One being the default one, the one where we've worked closely with our supplier to allocate out how we're growing, and this is really based on how we've grown in the past, but looking at, as I said, developer intentions and capacity. Then a scenario looking at prioritising our priority growth areas and fast tracks. say what happens if that's where all our growth happens. Then a scenario looking at how we've grown in the past. So essentially, last year we had really high growth into Tapawai as the southern corridor. And then looking at 2025 projections as a comparison so we can see. So what we're able to do with that model is we're able to put in our current LTP investment and we can see where the hotspots are. So when we do the new long-term plan, we'll be able to put in that and then we'll see when things are coming up under capacity.
So sorry, just when you're talking about capacity here, you're talking about planning capacity.
Planning capacity,
So
not
land use
oh,
capacity,
yeah,
not
sorry.
infrastructure capacity.
Yeah,
So the next phase of this, to go to Cody and John's point, is in the future, we would want to have a kind of end-to-end integrated model where you can move levers and actually see the impacts. You know, if you change your infrastructure investment program, what that does to where capacity is released, but we do not have a model like that at the moment. So we have a very manual way of doing that, stitching together a bunch of hydraulic models, spreadsheets, this model, and that we update when we have to do things like the HPCA. Ideally, in the future, we would have an integrated, smart, way of doing that. But when Anita's talking about capacity here, she's talking about planning capacity.
That took us a long time to realise when we were meeting with P and I that we were talking about different capacities, and it was like hallelujah, and now we know why we're not on the same page sometimes. But yeah, so essentially these scenarios, I don't know how much you want to go through them, but just to know that they're here. So that essentially the base case is that this is the one that we are planning towards, and it's most in line with our community's expectations. It shows growth in the project development areas, but it also shows some growth in the settlements. So it's traditionally, this is more in line with how we have been growing. So yeah, it's just moving forward with what we've discussed with developers and what we're likely to see. In some areas like Tiputahi and Tapawai, even though there's high levels of growth, again, that's why the importance of the monitoring. We could see higher levels come faster or slower. So that's why it's just about making sure that the monitoring happens.
Sorry, just to be clear, this isn't the percentage growth rate in these areas, it's the percentage of the growth that is happening in those areas. So this is how it's spread across these areas. I realise just looking at that now that isn't explained anyway. Apologies for that.
Anita, it feels to me that the new Planning Act is actually going to unlock a lot more development at a lot quicker speed.
Yeah.
Like it's hard to know how much is coming, but I actually think it's a lot coming to this district, and the speed at which I've got friends who live in Canada who've got a similar scenario, and they talk about being able to do a development in 6 months, starting to getting titles.
Wow.
So the speed that this is going to happen and the amount seems to be, well, I feel like it's coming like a freight train.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that, and how much of that have you factored into your base case?
I know, and that is exactly something we're grappling with. What we've been trying to think of a team and talk around with all our partners is will the fast tracks result in more growth? You know, are we actually, so what we've predicted this growth, but are we talking about growth on growth? And that's something we don't know, because what we know is when there are sections for sale, they sell out in 20 minutes. And yeah, so that's something we're just going to have to keep an eye on. There's 2 lines of thought. It could disperse our growth. That could mean we could have more options, and potentially it could slow, you know, developments may not take place as quickly as we thought, or it could have the complete opposite effect. It could just ramp it up, and every time something goes, we just suddenly are growing a lot quicker. So that's something we're just going to have to monitor. But in terms of that, we have projected high levels of growth in that the first 4 years. So we'll just have to keep a watch on that. We've talked to Stats New Zealand. I don't think I haven't got a grip on what people are anticipating. So we're just going to have to have a careful watch on it. But you're right. If I was probably, I'd be more inclined to think it could potentially result in more.
So from a government policy perspective, their intent is that the growth would be dispersed. And so actually that's why they're trying to do these things, because they want more development, which means that there's more supply than demand, which means prices go down. That's their whole driver. But that has never happened here. So ironically, what may happen here is it actually just increases the growth and doesn't do anything to housing affordability.
But I just wonder whether this rhetoric that the RMA has really constrained development is true or not. Because I mean, I look at all the growth areas in Wanaka, you look at Three Parks, you look at, you know, the other block next to that, that is actually going as fast as you can imagine. You know, Hawi has gone as fast as it can. There hasn't been any constraint on consenting. You know, Northlake's going flat out. I mean, I just don't really believe that the RMA is constrained growth in this area in the way that some people say it has. And I don't think I'm just unlocking that. The SHAs didn't really change the equation, just change where development occurred. And the same fast track's only going to change where the development's occurring, not, you know, the amount of it. And the fact that, you know, we're sitting on Ladies Mile, for instance, is that there's people who could be developing there already. They're not, because they're not ready to, or they're not capitalised. It's got nothing to do with consenting. You know, they've had multiple avenues of consenting. So,
No, I agree. I mean, we.
So, and you look at Bracknell's Park. I mean, it's sitting on 3,500 dwelling units or something. And the speed hasn't changed. They're developing it at exactly the speed that they choose to develop it. It has got nothing to do with consenting. They've been sitting on a zone for God knows how long. Three Parks has been sitting on a zone for God knows how long.
So we don't need to convince anyone here then, do we?
No,
Well,
no, but you're open to, and also the type of developers we have in our district, you know, so they're able to sit on it. What we're probably seeing with some of these fast tracks is they may not be as able to sit on it for as long. Even the likes of Jack's Point, I mean, we still haven't seen it completely built out to its fruition. So those areas you just listed are owned by, you know, the people that have been able to sit on it. So we might see, but that might move it to the other areas.
Yeah, one of the problems, but like I said, I just can't accept that it's ever been a constraint on development in this area, and I just don't.
No, I agree.
I think
Could it be faster or slower, but I just don't.
yeah, having heard Minister Bishop on the radio this morning again, I don't think we're going to shift down on that one publicly. So, but what I do think, you know, the big difference to all of this is you get a change in policy setting from the government that says actually anyone who wants to buy a house from overseas in New Zealand can now buy a house. All of this is out the window, right?
Yeah.
So that's that being nimble and being able to change.
And same with Bill and I have been talking, you know, what does it mean for climate migration? Because we're one of the lucky ones that potentially are not as affected as other areas. So then do we become desirable in that too? So in terms of these, all of our scenarios in the past, 90 to 95% of our growth has been greenfield. We've had the proposed district plan that has enabled intensification. So that's something we are monitoring and watching. So we may see a shift at some point. So we have monitored in our demand projections how shift, but that's something again we'll have to just keep a close eye on. But traditionally, most of our growth has been greenfield, and that's something that we're predicting to increase, although we are subtly bringing in some of that infill and intensification. So the other scenario we're testing is the priority development area growth and also the fast tracks. So that's really a centre focus, but then also dispersed at the same time, and that could have quite significant impacts on our road network and also our the school networks. So that's why this is a good scenario to test. In terms of the scenario 3, the consenting data, that's just looking at the past, how we have grown. What we saw is really strong growth in the likes of the Southern Corridor, Hawea and Three Parks. So that's just looking at what happens if that continued. But what this doesn't enable is those new areas like the emerging Tiputahi, other areas in Wanaka. So that's why this is a really good testing ground. The last one is just that base case. And while that's important is it gives us that ability to test infrastructure investment from the past and what that would look like under the new scenarios. So I just did I don't think I need to go through that in detail, but did anyone have some questions?
Just I think Quentin's point is really relevant in terms of it doesn't change it only changes the where, not the cost. I think, and you know, to point to your comment around it being greenfield, it's the incentives that aren't aligned. And I think the irony is that we're working with free market, but we're seeing free market incentives because everyone's trying to cut corners and upzone land. It's not appropriate because it's the most lucrative thing to do. So I do think, an example, if we rated to a point where we rated all land that was zoned as if there was housing there, it would be really expensive for somebody to hold on to it. And then they would, either be incentivized to develop it in the infill areas that we want it to happen, or sell it to somebody who will. So I guess that's why it's kind of nice to see the holistic stuff coming to talk to each other when we do a wholesale rating review, is the fact that our incentives for development are misaligned with the outcomes that we're planning for.
So when you start having the workshops on the rating model, that's one of the things that Philip will be exploring with you more in those sessions. I think you're getting it over that process next week. 16th of July.
So, I mean, in terms of where the growth goes, whether it's greenfield or intensification, what are the levers that we can use to influence that? Because obviously we've got the infrastructure, we've got the pipes, we've got the street lights, they don't have the roads, but generally, so that, folding down some of the older housing stock and rebuilding it with higher density, support public transport, supports a few other things. What are the most effective things that we can do to drive that rather than struggle?
Can I answer that?
I think you have to sit at that end of the day.
Yeah.
I think we need to look at the things that are in our control, and rating is one of them. And then High Court case from Auckland did, open it up and make it a bit more flexible, I think. So that could be something, the rating, as part of the JHAP, we were trying to look at incentives, but obviously there are other incentives that there could be, we could offer. I know that in Auckland, they have a team that offers you, they'll meet with you and then offer you a pathway if you're developing in an area where we foresee development and it's in line with our requirements. So you get a streamlined pathway there. Development contributions, you could be looking, there's things like that. If, for instance, Christchurch, if you're building affordable housing, you don't get charged development contributions. So there are some things that we can do, but there are trade-offs to our community, but that someone does need to pay for that. Yep. So that's why it needs to be considered holistically, because while we're helping on one hand, and then someone else on another hand will have to pay.
Yeah, it's essentially like, again, show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. That's all it is. Anyone's going to maximize the capacity of what it's going to be for them financially. And so if you rate it for the capacity of what that land is going to be, then people will be incentivized to develop into the capacity. At the moment with the capital rating system, you're charged proportionally based on how much you improve the value of your land. So you're disincentivized to improve it. You're not punished for holding on to it. It's actually half the cost to leave it at bare land. And it's the most lucrative because you don't have to invest any capital into it. So it's like, it's obvious for anybody to go in to it and just land bank, and it's what a whole bunch of other councils have done previously to build wealth. So I do think it's like, if you're wanting to build a smart future plan and you're relying on free market incentives to deliver on it, then you need to align the free market incentives with the plan. If you don't do that, then you've got a misalignment. It doesn't matter how much you wish someone will do something, as long as free market's in control of delivering it, they will only deliver what the incentives give them.
Yeah, hope is not a strategy. That's what it is. So, okay, right. Thank you.
So just to close
need
this
to
out.
round out on this. Yeah.
So just making sure that we're all clear on this one, that the base case is the one that we are feeding into the rest of the planning. But what we're doing is we use the other ones to test.
Yep.
And then the really important thing that is going to be happening from now is this close monitoring of what actually happens with growth, and having that checked in with the infrastructure delivery and planning ongoing. So that is I'm not going to say that's new. It's new to be doing it at the macro level through Anita's team instead of updating the demand projections every year. It's the capacity approach and linking in the discussions that are already happened in the infrastructure space about that into the macro picture, so that we can. So it's just noting that there's that key change with the customised projections that we're going to be monitoring really closely, and then we're using the base case for planning for the LTP and the infrastructure strategy. So yes, you wanted to
we're preparing a dashboard that will go public, so the public will actually be able to see the numbers happening in those areas too. So it will be a public facing tool.
Okay. Nikki, you got a question?
Very quick, just around capacity, how are we assessing the capacity of government's infrastructure, and then how are we using the understanding of that capacity?
So that's that's the picture that we are starting to build up as part of that cumulative impacts work, which we'll be talking about the approach we're going to take at next week's Smart Growth Committee. We've already started that for infrastructure for transport. So that transport A3 that you all saw that we built for the discussions we were having around the regional deal, which shows the impact of growth on NZTA's network. It's the integrated transport network. We're wanting to build those similar pictures for other types of infrastructure that are both in our control and not in our control.
Yep. I guess, sorry, and I don't know how to rephrase the question, but there's two ways of looking at it. I guess one is, what is the impact of growth on the infrastructure? But if we're looking at capacity from a how much do we enable, when do we build, how do we use the capacity of that infrastructure to inform decisions on how much we deliver of other infrastructure, if that makes sense?
So part of that, sorry, I should have clarified that, part of that is identifying the capacity, where there are deficits, what the capacity is, so that that can inform decision making. But we don't have all of that information yet.
Do we even have a tool though to recognise the state highways as a constraint on development in our system?
No.
So when we're making a decision around whether we approve a subdivision in the Southern Corridor, for instance, we don't factor in state highway capacity at all in our decision making. Is what I'm saying.
Sorry, I don't know about that. From a resource consent perspective, I don't believe so. Yeah.
We need that.
Which is a problem. Which is, I think, is the point. That's a major problem. We just simply can't ignore transport as a constraint on development. As you know, the same way you would approve a subdivision if you can't convey the sewerage. You know,
I think it's just really challenging in this space to refuse. I mean, it's sorry, I've been a resource consent planner for a number of years, but it's when we're looking at, when I was a consent planner, we were looking at the impact on local roads and and the impact on the state highway, so the limited access. It becomes quite, the system's not geared up for that type of
saying,
so that's why the efficacy is so.
We're in an unusual situation is that our state highways internalised in our network, whereas in most places it's not. The state highway comes to the edge of the network and the local network, and we deal with the rest of it now. But I mean, I just don't get how we could, that like we did the housing capacity assessment, we effectively ignored transport as a limitation, saying it only really affects people's
quality of life.
Quality of life. It's not we don't treat it as a critical constraint. I thought the point is we have to.
I'm assuming what you're saying is would end up in court if we did consider it.
I think we just it's difficult and with what we've got at the moment to challenge it. But that's why I think the advocacy and making sure we're showing those deficits and those pictures, that's why it becomes really important.
But in terms of where we spend our money, right, that is not determined by who's got a resource consent and who hasn't.
Yeah.
Our investment in infrastructure should be where it makes sense. There's no point putting a whole heap of pipes into the ground into a new subdivision if it's to be wonderfully gated because nobody will be able to get out of it. When we've got other areas that we know will be successful because the matching connectivity or whatever it is there. I mean, I think that's the latitude that we have is the where we spend and what we spend, and I know there's always been tension. Something's got a fast track through, so we have to accelerate that. What we were planning to spend 5 years doing, we now expect to do it again. I mean, we have to say, well, we've got to do sensible spending, right?
And the efficiency of that's really important too, because you touched on infill before, and about a third of our capacities tied up in infill capacity. Now, that's actually the most expensive development that we can do. Well, there's a whole bunch of things we'd love to do because it's, vibrant and efficient for transport, all that sort of stuff. That is you know, to retrofit and upgrade the capacity of all our existing residential areas, put bigger pipes in the ground is literally the most expensive thing we can do. So, you know, putting high density into the Frankton Flats and putting high density into 3 parks is actually efficient because you can put the thing in the ground once, you can do it right, you can, you know, so we've got to actually think about efficiency in terms of delivery of that stuff as well.
Okay,
And that was sort of-
Nikki's got a hand up, Nikki?
Sorry, like I'm just bringing it back to what we can do. We can sort of pass on some directions through this process. So I guess I'd just like to send a bit of a direction to staff that we do need to, alongside the work on the capacity that you haven't done yet but are doing, I think we need to look at methods other than advocacy for dealing with the constraints on government infrastructure. So to John's point, you know, how do they then inform what we invest in and what we don't, how we consent, how we don't? I think there's a piece of work that needs to come back to us on that risk that sits with that and how our different options for how we treat that risk. And I think that needs to come back at some point in the near future to help us make decisions.
And I guess I would phrase it as, how do we answer that question, which we all hear from our community? Why are you consenting this stuff, allowing it to be built when you know it's not going to end well? And I guess that's a very high level, yeah, because we know things like economics are things that maybe aren't in our control. I don't know that's what the answer is, but I think we've covered that one. John, have you
Well, I don't know yet.
Okay.
Thanks. To be able to advocate effectively for our communities into the future, we need a really good argument. And therefore, we were told earlier this year, I'm pretty sure, that there was a modelling tool being developed for the transport space, which was, I think, used to inform that map that you shared with us a few weeks ago, which was great, because it's identifying where the choke points are going to be. It's that kind of stuff which brings together the population modelling and the change of the nature of the population and where activity centres are that people need to get to. And then the transport flows come in over the top, and then we can have a strong argument to advocate, because we have seen this government change its approach in relation to Auckland. Now, yes, it's bigger numbers, but unless we have a good model to be able to put a really strong argument to say, well, this is the pathway that you're forcing our communities down. Our hands are tied. And this is what you're going to result in. I thought Steve's point earlier was so pertinent. Having been in Canada at the time that they introduced their building code changes 8 years before New Zealand, and they ended up with leaky buildings long before us, and we still went ahead and did it. And they were informing one another at the same time. You know, we need to be able to have that evidence to say, not only say, this is what's going to look like, here's some lines on a map, but this is the consequence of that. And we don't have to then, because otherwise we're going to be trying to clean up some almost a disaster, not a disaster, but a really critical crisis situation down the track.
That's exactly what we're doing.
Okay,
So that's what we want. That's what
clear
we're
what we're
talking
trying to do. Before we move on to Bill, I'm just interested to get with Matt, Melissa, you've got anything you want to chip in? Haven't heard from you.
No, not at the stage, thanks.
No, I haven't got anything further to add.
No, carry on.
Okay.
I have one comment. I agree with the base case. I am slightly concerned about the way it does flatten out. Like in your table, you know, you've got 3% growth in the first 10 years from 27, and then it tapers out to 2%.
Mhm.
So I'm just concerned about. I do have that concern, but I guess you relayed those concerns because you're telling me that it can be monitored and it can be flexible.
No, it's 4.4% growth for the first 8 years, and then it's 3.1% thereafter.
Yeah, and then but then your table 3,
Oh, that's
your summary.
yeah.
Is that's your base case?
Right at the end.
It's in the report. It says 3%.
And then
2027 to 2037 is 3%.
Yeah.
residents, and then it's 2% for the 30, so it's 3% for the
Yeah.
first 10 and
I'll check that.
2%.
Yeah.
So I just didn't, but then my question that I written down, why does it slow down from 37 to 57? And I guess your
Oh,
answer
yes,
is
just because we
it's
stated.
quantums.
Yeah.
It's quantums
Yeah.
because it's
Because
the
even,
number of
yeah,
scenarios.
but because 2% of say 80,000
Yeah.
is still a
Still
significant amount.
1,500.
Yeah, it's still 1,900. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just, So I agree with the base. I'm just concerned about the
And-
future stuff, but I guess because you're going to be monitoring it in the next 10 years, we can be a bit flexible.
You can, and also this is just based off what we're seeing nationally. So this is based off what Stats New Zealand is seeing and a range of people. So, this is completely outside of my area of expertise, but it's the monitoring that comes
I think it
along with it.
would probably be good to have what are the 5 things that we're measuring
Yeah.
that work out whether we're ahead or behind. There's actually probably be something that comes regularly to Smart Growth.
Yeah.
And that'll probably come in from a range of parts of the organisation.
Yeah, that's what, so we're thinking of every 6 months, just providing that detail and just showing the areas where we're growing and if it's quicker or slower or what's happening.
Because we've seen this week, there's a small change in Australia's tax laws.
Yes.
And the number of people now looking at properties in Queenstown has gone through the roof.
It is, yeah.
Superannuation funds and all that sort of stuff, personal super funds that will start to look here again.
And we've had a lot of new developers, keep in contact with have said that $5 million plus house is market being delivered is now looking a lot more attractive.
Okay, thank you. No easy answers, but we know very easy to find the problem.
Indeed. All right, so from the complexity of growth to the simplicity of resilience. Kia ora koutou. Look, thank you very much for this opportunity. So this morning I'll be talking about 2 planning settings. We will lead off with resilience and then we may take a break and then we'll go very quickly into the environmental considerations as well. Just to speak to your point earlier, John, our resilience planning is baked into the LTNA, particularly with regards to the infrastructure strategy. 101B, section 3E, which I'm sure you will be aware, providing for the resilience of infrastructure assets. It's a critical part by identifying and managing natural hazard risk. So this is baked into the legislation. It has always been a key part. It's part of every infrastructure strategy around the country. But for us, I guess, we are navigating quite a lot of complexity in this space. So the planning set that we're providing to you today covers a few different dimensions. Look, we are a very active natural hazard scape. You'll be very well aware of that. So I talk to you all very frequently about, I guess, those risks that are in that space. We have it as a strategic risk in that risk register. There's a lot of activity that happens with regards to managing natural hazard risk, but also building our capacity to respond, when things happen. But a big part of our overall response is to look at the resilience investments we are making. So the infrastructure strategies is a critical part of that. So within this current information set that you've been provided today, there are a few key topics that we introduce, and these are part of the broader work program that has been happening for a while. One of the key ones is relating to climate projections or climate scenarios. Because if we're talking about resilience, this is all about how we manage future disruption. When things go wrong, and while we have a very active seismic kind of landscape, and we know that we're going to be facing some big challenges at some point in the future, we're also aware that the climate is changing. And we've got some very specific information that's been worked through that was shared with the Risk and Assurance Committee last week around starting to do some downscaling or localising of climate projections. So we understand clearly what the future scenarios are that we're planning towards. A lot of our infrastructure has very long asset lives. So as we're looking at what we're doing today, we need to consider what the receiving environment, what the climate will look like in the future, and how it may impact upon the resilience levels of that infrastructure. So climate projection pathways is a piece of work that has been undertaken as part of a national working group around looking at local government climate scenarios. So it's kind of trying to understand as best as possible, provide planning instruments to local government so they can start to plan out and incorporate these future scenarios into land use planning, infrastructure planning, into how they're looking at the capacity of their organisations to deal with emergency events and how they recover from them. So there's quite a lot of complexity in the space, but the work we'll be doing up to date is now providing a nice foundation for this discussion, and certainly connects them very strongly with the areas around asset renewal and how we undertake looking at our existing assets and how we invest in those in the future. And that's the area that Ellie will be covering on final planning setting.
So, but just without getting into the detail of the scenarios and climate projections, I just want to give you some reassurances. The reports that were provided to Risk and Assurance Committee last week provide quite a bit of detail around information at a national level around climate risk, at a regional level in terms of the Otago Climate Change Risk Assessment that we're supporting the Otago Regional Council with, and also this localised effort that we're undertaking. And that local effort has produced a set of kind of projections that we will be incorporating into the resilience work across council. So the infrastructure as a strategy will surface that, we'll reference it. And the information you see on the screen at the moment regarding the 3 scenarios acting now for a Mokopuna, leaving it to the next generation, or inheriting a broken world, those are all downscale pieces of work that link into this concept of shared socio-economic pathways, which is what the global this future around climate change projections. That's the model that's out there. So this work will continue to be iterative and build, but we've made some very good progress, and what we're doing locally lines up very strongly with regional and national level efforts as well. So this information will be carried forth into how we actually plan for infrastructure. So while we are the strategy will also give some indication around the projects that are important from a resilience point of view. The question of how do we bake in these considerations around resilience, and for every project that we're looking at, that's a key part of what this planning segment talks to. So the climate protection pathways provide a sense about the potential futures that we could be progressing towards. The next slide there gives a framework for how we then take that information and embed it into our asset level kind of decisions. How are we looking at when we look at new assets for investment? Understanding what the risk associated with them, how critical are they to the community? Similarly with the existing assets, what is the risk if we have a significant outage to them or a disruption event? And trying to understand where those criticality, critical assets are and critical corridors. That gives us then an indication in terms of how much investment we make with regards to resilience to those particular assets. We can't harden everything. We can't build things stronger across every piece of our asset portfolio. So there needs to be a framework by which we look at and identify those areas that have, I guess, the highest impact on our communities. So the visual that you see on the screen just gives an indication of the various pathways that can occur with assets that are deemed most critical versus those that are less and which are probably can be repaired and recovered should we have disruptive events. Of course, when we start to look at those critical assets, there are some hard options that have to be made. We can protect and retrofit some to make sure that they can withstand the changes in the natural landscape. Bridges are a good example. What do we do with them? Similar with road networks. But you also then face tough decisions. Once the natural environment starts to really significantly change, can we keep maintaining those? Are we seeing repeated outages? Do we have situations like Skipper's Bridge where we've got an asset that can no longer be maintained? Do we need to look at service retreat? So those are kind of quite significant considerations for the future as you start to see a more dynamic landscape. But setting the frameworks now so that we're evaluating those, looking out to the future and understanding clearly the decisions we're making right now, particularly with renewals and investments around what we can do to make sure that those assets are still being maintained. This is all part of that planning picture for infrastructure. So the following 3 slides present some pathway options with regards to how we can be looking at resilience. There is very much a space where we can be reactive and we are simply looking to repair the things that get broken. Anita was quite correct. We've done climate projections that are quite concerning when you look at worst case, but they're nowhere near as bad as what we're seeing either nationally or globally. There is a slight Goldilocks zone in this area where we are unlikely to see most significant, impacts of climate change, particularly with cyclones, weather events, the level of rainfall we're likely to see. So while the future could be quite different to what we are now, it's probably more benign than other parts of the world, and that could feed into therefore increased growth projections we're seeing. But also, that does have a factor to play in regards to the level of investment we are prepared to make. So reactive approaches is possible. So we'll step through, if we can, just the 3 scenarios that we've outlined for your considerations. So reactive and affordability needs, we repair the things that get broken. We maintain existing renewal budgets. We look at those safety interventions that are important from a risk point of view. But there's not an over significant level of investments. We are just kind of slightly not so hoping, but we're certainly playing on the fact that we haven't had investment in the past, and therefore we won't have it in the future. So it does represent an approach by which we are waiting to see what happens. There is no minimum levels of proactivity to it. We're simply looking to kind of try and maintain and existing approach to how we're maintaining assets and looking at incorporating base level risk assessments into new assets as we go forward. If their appetite for that is insufficient, we can start to go, well, look, we really do need to look at targeted investments. Right, so we've got a number of assets that are aging across our asset portfolio. We've got areas of risk that we're aware of. And so the investments into that space can be quite targeted, which is what the second option represents. So we start to focus on understanding where those critical areas, assets, corridors and services are that we can't afford to fail. We look at a reasonable level of investment across them. We take a structured kind of risk-based approach which incorporates a lot of climate risk information into it. And we start to see where those interdependencies and service criticality lies. There is a lot of focus in the space often on cascading failures to see if things will compound upon one another. So early interventions and resilience investments can make a big difference, particularly with regards to ensuring the community has continuity and has service levels after significant events. In this space, we also look at energy. It's been a big topic of late. And starting to understand what are the resilience investments that can be made across batteries. Looking at the opportunity for shifting electricity around also in times of need, and trying to build that resilience into how our assets utilise energy and at least there's efficiency improvements as well. So that's a kind of it's a summary of where we kind of take this targeted option. It does involve some specific point investments and some known areas of risk. And perhaps the potential to accelerate the timing of those investments as well. Third option is we start to look at a real accelerated resilience uplift. Right? So there is always things that we can do and we can bring forward, and it comes down to the question of risk appetite. If we want to ensure that we have the right levels of significant levels of investments to provide protection to the community, then further investments can be made. A good example is perhaps something that has been raised recently is around the EOCs. For a targeted option, we can look at multi-use dual facilities that we can set up relatively quickly. In this space, we could also, for accelerated resilience uplift, we can look at more of an IL4 operation centre that starts to kind of really ensure that that level of resilience is in place for that particular asset. We can also look at what other areas across particularly flood protection works. You've got a number of flood protection assets already. At the moment, we are looking to kind of service those, maintain them. But this accelerated resilience uplift will start to look at what the projections around some of those stormwater networks and flooding risks look like, and then put the commensurate investments in place to support the community. So it really is kind of a case of us trying to understand from a risk perspective how much kind of investment do we get to make in this space, and looking at the timing of that as it kind of overlaps with other areas of need as well.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt. So we started off with the climate scenario, talking about climate risk, but obviously these options are more than just climate risk because we've got seismic risk.
Correct.
So I don't think the answer to Point Bridge is nature washing away in a flood. So, but it's in there. So how do we, from an investment point of view, that because major seismic event, would be so where would we spend our money to say, actually, we want our wastewater to be resilient, or we want our water supply to be resilient, we want our comms to be resilient through an alpine fault event, or that's less impacted as we can reasonably achieve, versus climate change risk, flooding, that's like, because they're completely different and they're not interconnected, but we're having to choose, or we will have to make choices. So how do we balance the, one's low increasing probability but high consequence? Yes. Is, probably, got great certainty about the impacts, and we probably better quantify the results. So just interested if you're able to speak.
I'd say, look, there's no simple answer to that. you know, we live in a multi-hazard environment, and this cascade phase can often occur, particularly when severe weather events lead to landslips, lead to other impacts that we see across the network. Seismic risk is, you know, it's a high consequence, I guess, low frequency event. When it does happen, it is going to be significant. So in that space, particularly, we're doing a lot around AFA planning, but you know, we have to accept things will get damaged, things will kind of be impacted. It therefore comes down to the question of insurance and understanding what those kind of modular options might look like afterwards to ensure we've got a level of kind of, I guess, support to the community, and then we try and build back better. So, you know, seismic resilience has to be kind of managed across, you know, the whole country, as well as this question around more frequent weather events that we do see. Now, there's less kind of rainfall and significant storm events like up north and at least the coastal regions that impact on our district, but they are likely to increase in significant kind of cloud, I guess, burst events, not too dissimilar to what we saw in September 2023. So it's a difficult one, John, but you're building resilience across a network, look, understanding where there's critical, what are the critical corridors, how are we providing both, I guess, an appropriate level of resilience investment in that asset, but also the dual use, the redundancy, the investments that we see around that, utilising the lake, you know, looking at wharves and jetties is a good example, which is on the screen in front of you. So there has to be that kind of multi-lens assessment across all asset categories, more or less, and then that kind of needs to feed into the resilience, so the response planning and the recovery kind of provisions we have in place as well. So
I guess that's the difference between your three options, though. The first option is that we're reactive when things happen. The second option, or as we replace things, we make sure they're resilient. The second option is that we understand the risks and the consequences, and we invest proactively in the ones with the highest consequences. Some of which will be related to the climate scenarios, some of which will be, you know, seismic risk related. And then the option three is you essentially are applying that to a broader range of things, not just the highest risk on the highest criticality corridors, if you like. So that's the main difference between the three, but you're looking at all of those risk types.
Just a quick reminder as well, had some examples there about water services, and that's not included in the LTP. So this also does relate to how you set expectations for the CCO.
So those dollar figures in here, do they include water infrastructure? No, don't. Okay, thank you.
But it is worth noting, look, there are stormwater assets that fall within the actual transport space as well. So there is this crossover and flood protections, another key one as well. So, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, but going beyond operational protection, if you like, those sort of things, we have some high risk areas, the Gorge Road, Rivers Lane, Bury Lane, things where we've got some pretty significant decisions to make around how we address long-term risk, and obviously Glenorchy, and there'll be others in the district to, you know, to various degrees. But I mean, that one up Gorge Road here is a pretty, you know, it's one way or the other, whether it's mitigation works or whether it's property issues, there's a big number against it. But we haven't really factored that in as a, you know, we haven't, I mean, I don't know how long we've kicked the can down the road on that. And there's clearly consequences in our LTP around which way we go. So how we factor those things in.
So some of those all comes into the conversation around how between ourselves and the regional council risk is being defined. And I know there's been movements on that in recent months that we have worked about a short while ago.
I mean, this has been one of my problems though, is we haven't been really clear about who's, you know, at Glenorchy, the ORC have taken the lead, and in Gorge Road, we've taken the lead around risk. I mean, I just don't know where, that's one area where, you know, and once again, the unitary council thing will probably
and it's the legislation as it comes to
and the legislation and the natural hazards MPS and all these other various things come into play. It doesn't, the issues don't go away. The cost of managing them or mitigating them, including retreat, is massive, you know. So we haven't factored these in very well.
Nor is there included in here, but I have seen it in other things, including the work on Millstream Gorge Road, where the consequences of an event happening have been quantified in predominantly dollar terms, but also potentially impact on communities, which is happening in Glenorchy too. So, because the level of investment, there are often multipliers applied to if you invest $1 now in mitigation, that it'll be worth $8 or $10. Now, that's not actually verified by any research. It is my area somewhat of expertise. But could you in helping us make these decisions, come up with using the scenarios? Because if there are more severe weather events, which are going for some of them, it is our infrastructure and it's our communities and, if you like, our economy. What are those impacts going to be to help us make a decision about what would be a worthwhile level of investment to make, by giving some steer as to how much of an impact that investment will have in reducing that cost in future? Because the other part that's changing in all this is that the government across the board, but particularly the current government, are wanting to step back from central government contribution to recovery when it happens, particularly to local government infrastructure. So that's something we need to think about. How do we take that on board ourselves if it's not going to be there as it has been in the past?
There is a looming climate adaptation liability out there as well. And at the moment, the central government's putting no kind of planning in place with regards to who's going to fund that. Now, with regards to climate adaptation, often that is in regards to coastal communities, but we have got areas like Glenorchy with the river systems that fall into that kind of space as well. So at the moment, there isn't any indication beyond the fact that councils will be required to do adaptation planning. So if you're leading the adaptation planning, the question of who funds those mitigation activities afterwards.
Just remember, this is playing out in real time in Dunedin. So, it's not. This is not hypothetical.
No.
So yeah, I'm going to go to Matt, then I'm going to go to Nikki, then I'll go to Melissa, and then Kevin.
Thank you. I guess with these options, it's pretty clear to see with those dollar figures, even though I'm not looking at them that closely, but the impact on OPEX and CAPEX, right? So option one's obviously the cheaper option. But the flip side of that is, with option one, let's just say, after an event, what is the estimated cost to stand these things back up? Not even for, well, Central's not coming to the party, they're not going to be the cavalry that's going to help us. So the other side of that is after the event, because this is all in peacetime, I guess. After a major event, how much will it cost us, or how far behind are we in investment to stand back up of this critical infrastructure? And is that a question that can't answer?
It's a big question. What I can say, without going into the water space, because I know that's we've got another entity there, but some of that loss modeling's happened before around the water, our water networks, to see what's depending on the type of quake and this, I guess where it occurs, what would be that dollar value impact, and it's significant. And so this is what I guess this is why we have insurance. This is why we kind of try to understand a 60-40 split between what central government traditionally has paid for, but is now kind of starting to kind of put out some consultation around changing that. So it is quite difficult to kind of estimate. Big events like what we've just seen in Venezuela last week are profound. They are intergenerational kind of challenges. Smaller events like we're seeing around the country are impacting councils' balance sheets completely. Marlborough, the Whairawhiti, the level of costs that are associated with CAPEX and OPEX after to recover and clean up is significant. So it's very hard to model all that beyond starting to look at what those climate projections suggest in terms of the increased levels of rainfall, increased frequencies of potentially storm events. So it's a little bit speculative, but it there's a foundation of an approach we can start to take and build into our planning with regards to what levels of resilience are there, how are we looking at renewals, what are those options that are in front of us to just keep repairing something that gets getting impacted, or to actually shift it or move it or even retreat from it.
So I think it's probably fair to say that work has not been done to be able to quantify that future impact. So these options are based on risk. So they're based on, if you are responding in a way to spend the least amount of money, dealing with things as they happen, you're exposed to the most amount of risk at one end. At the other end, you're mitigating the risk as much as you can by investing as much as you can. And in the middle is a balance where you're targeting the things that would be most affected and cause the biggest consequences if they were impacted. But I mean, as John alluded to, there's a lot of, there'd be a lot of it's very speculative to try and estimate that future impact. That aside, we haven't done that. So this is based on a risk-based approach where you'd, I mean, I don't know if you can tell from the discussion, but the kind of targeted one in the middle is probably what we think is a good idea.
That's the challenge, is it's really
Yeah.
hard to assess the risk on this.
Yeah,
For us
it
to
is.
make a decision on which is the
Absolutely.
best option.
Yeah.
And I think historically, you know, we have been a bit averse to creating sort of emergency funds to be able to be stood up in the event of this and have relied on borrowing effectively in the
Yes,
event of
yeah.
emergency, which, you know, we've always maintained some headroom in that. And I think with the shift to the water services entity, obviously that headroom equation is going to look quite different. But yeah, so
Well, I
that's how we
think my perspective, and this is why I brought up the EOC, is because regardless, I don't think we're going to be able to afford any option when an event happens. That's the reality of it for all councils. But having an EOC, at least we can react properly to an event once it's happening, or in the process of happening.
And I think the risk-based approach to being able to identify what our highest, you know, criticality assets are that we want to ensure are resilient has become more important when you've seen the impact of some of those events around New Zealand in the last few years. So like when you look at what happened in the Hawke's Bay, the communities that were cut off, you know, you want to try and make sure that that kind of thing doesn't happen whilst not, you know, preventing everything that happens. So yeah, obviously there's a real balance to be struck. But yeah, the recovery part is really important. How do you make sure you can kick in as soon as something does happen so that you can support the community to get through it with whatever the consequences have been.
That work up front around risk assessments to understand clearly what we're trying to achieve is very critical. So, you know, obviously the focus has to be on ensuring that people are safe, that life safety is paramount. But there are all risk assessments for property damage and stuff as well. And that question is, can we, with better investments in, for example, some monitoring, understanding when events are happening, better investment in our response capacity to respond early, to ensure people are removed from any kind of risk. You know, can we allow property damage to be just part of, you know, what has to be suffered during those events? And we are seeing that around the country where, you know, things are being sacrificed at a property level because the most paramount thing is to ensure people are safe. And then, you know, people are not always living in the right places where they should be either. So the nature of how our planning laws are imperative. So there is that kind of making sure that the more investments we can make up front to look at risk reduction, understand where those areas are, they then feed into what we can invest in, you know, whether it's about, you know, keeping what we've got, protecting or retrofitting it, or allowing it to be sacrificed.
That's the way to
there's
put
a,
it. Allowing it to be sacrificed.
there's a distinction between our response,
Yes, yeah.
and then our recovery plan.
Yes.
Yeah, we can plan our response, and we can probably put financial numbers around what that looks like and what it involves. But what the long-term recovery plan is, we'll have no idea. Yeah, we might have a few guesses as to how we might do things, but whether a recovery plan would be determine our investment at this stage, I'm not sure. We go to Nikki and then go to Melissa and then Gavin. Nikki.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, good. It's really good discussion. I had a few thoughts. One is we can have a discussion here about risk and you know, set a strategic direction, but it's going to be no good unless we set up the processes within the different teams to manage resilience risk. So I'm thinking the planning team and thinking about where we grow. I'm thinking about things like, you know, for P&I, when we think about our approach to supplying infrastructure, do we supply it? How much do we shift onto the developer so that we can shift the risk back to landowners if that's appropriate? You know, how do we manage peak flows so that, you know, we don't have as much infrastructure? There's a huge piece here that's much bigger than simply looking at, you know, option 1, 2 or 3. And I know you guys know that, but unless, I don't know how to articulate this, I'm thinking of decisions like throwing out ideas like, oh, you know, we might need to put a reticulated wastewater into Glenorchy, you know, at the same time as the adaptation piece is going on. Some of the thinking doesn't make sense. I guess we're not there yet in our different departments in terms of thinking about what's next and managing risk. How do we, on top of let's say we decided to invest more and we gave you direction to go with option 2. How do we ensure that the right decisions are made, that we're getting bang for that extra buck, that we're not building in the wrong areas and therefore having to, create more resilience? Sorry, I'll stop talking. Do you kind of get where I'm going with that?
Yeah. It's a really good point, Nikki. And this is looking ahead 30 years effectively here. So, if you give us a steer on one of these, we then go away and do that piece of work to understand, well, okay, what are all the different layers to this? Because it would present quite a different way of thinking, could present a different way of working within the context of the future of local government. It's going to look different in different iterations of that as well. So yeah, you're absolutely right. That's all the detail that need to work.
It comes back to the cost of building in some areas. I mean, we should understand what is the risk and resilience cost of building in a certain area versus another. We should understand that before we deliver on our spatial plan. Resilience costs money. We have to make sure that we're putting people in the right areas where it's going to cost us less into the future. Is that the Southern Corridor or is it Wanaka? I mean, we don't have that level of sophistication. It's not very sophisticated, but we don't really focus. Yeah, go for it.
I'll respond to that, Nikki. Hey, thanks for that. And look, I totally agree that resilience is a system level challenge across everything. And people are doing resilience investment, focused work constantly all the time. What we're talking about here is I guess, the opportunity to say, how do we see where those gaps are in those risk areas? Now, I know I work very closely with Anita, particularly resilience planning and understanding how natural hazard risk is incorporated into that spatial planning space. That's a core foundation, right? And so that's, and within the RMA as well, of course, as well. Do, I guess, good decisions get overridden at times through with developers' interest at stake? Yes, we see that around the country all the time. Councils are making very clear provisions around trying to protect against development and hazard areas, and it still occurs. So it is an ongoing challenge, isn't it? But I guess with your work,
yes.
Do you want to talk to that?
So essentially, when we in our spatial plan Gen 1, that hazards, that was a really important layer, but it was based off all the information we had to date. Moving forward, that's why the structure planning has been so pivotal and important, because essentially we've had to understand to a much greater detail the level of natural hazards in the area. So, for instance, to Tapawai, we had to drill boreholes and, to understand that. So then that feeds into Bill's work. So then we have that model that then feeds into our infrastructure team, our community services team for their investment. So we are building a more significant picture than we've ever had before. And so that's just really highlights that importance of understanding that at that structure plan level. Also, it means that our resource consent team, and they've had some natural hazard assessments done there, we've been able to say, well, actually, that doesn't 100% line up with our natural hazard assessment. Can you please provide more information? So it's made us be in a higher level of understanding of what's happening down there. So so then liabilities to our community are lessened over time.
I guess the thing is we understand it. I guess, sorry, final thing for me, it's that framework around you've got the information and then which decisions do you make off the back of it. Each decision will have a different risk and cost impact into the future. Which one do we take? And I just will highlight the urban intensification variation, which saw intensification along, State Highway 6A and up on the side there of Frankton, some of it into landslide areas. So, we need to do better so that it costs us less down the track. Anyway, thank you.
Melissa?
Of the 3 options, where do we sit at the moment? Are we below reactive? Because what I'm reading into it is reactive is still more than what we're doing at the moment, or reactive is probably kind of where we're sitting.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to, I wouldn't say that at all. I think we're somewhere in that middle space, but there are
middle isn't targeted.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's where we currently sit.
And indeed, look, there are resilience investments. There is within the existing LTP, some quite significant projects that are in there that have a resilience lens too. So, the council has shown a past history and saying, well, we know where these things are important, as well as growth and other things. There are a lot of, good intent, and the current LTP is quite far out. So I think it's part of that question, at what point do we carry that risk that, we'll leave the jetties to decay a bit more, but or is it kind of maybe an investment in them to ensure we've got alternative water access, for example, during response requirements. So a lot of projects that we need to invest have been identified. It's that timing of where we pull it forward and how that competes there forward. with other funding priorities for other projects.
Yeah, because I guess it's hard to kind of answer the question, which is at the bottom of it, you know, as in, you know, without knowing where we are, because some of the quantums of numbers, it's like, sure, it'd be great to just do everything on accelerated, but is that, you know, when you look at the higher end figure, you're like, what is that, tripling everybody's rates or something? Like, which, I'm not comfortable with. So, I guess understanding where we're currently at would help guide which direction we would go.
So I'd say we're between 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're between,
More lifetime. With some things from 2.
I would say from an infrastructure planning perspective, it's the key improvement attached with option 2 is more around this kind of standardized or cohesive framework to embedding resilience-based decision making into our infrastructure planning. You know, we do it on a reasonably ad hoc basis. If we're making a big investment, we should be looking at the resilience of this. This option actually directs us to do that in a consistent way.
I like the sound of that.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Jesse, because with these planning settings, we are trying to do 2 things, I guess. Look at how we are making decisions, the framing that we provide around these areas and the importance, therefore, we place on it, as well as identifying some of those kind of like specific projects that may be associated with, you know, pulling some of that, that appetite forward.
Does that mean that it's less chance of us pushing it down the road like we always do with LTPs? And
it would certainly serve us maybe some harder decisions earlier. Perhaps don't get visibility now. And I don't know if you noticed, but right at the very end of the material, we just showed how this ultimately flows through to your investment roadmap. And so while all of these settings will influence how that looks, you'll see that there'll still always be choices about those things. So it might be that we bake into our budgets what we think is likely to land under this option, but you'll still always have that choice with that resilience assessment alongside
it. Because this is a 30-year program and because the frequency and significance of these climate change events at least are increasing over time. The longer we don't have a big earthquake, the more probability there is to have one.
Every day's a good day.
Do we have the option of looking at all, instead of just choosing one option today, looking at over 30 years, stepping through the options? So we start off where we are today for the first 2 years, because obviously also it has a big impact on rates and these things have to be embedded in slowly. Then in the intermediate term, we go to a targeted approach and then looking to getting to an accelerated approach later on in that 30-year period. It's an option.
I think that framing is perfectly valid. You know, what we are trying to do is build some foundations. I guess the last few years we have been doing that. We're working very much more, I guess, cross-functionally understanding natural hazard information, understanding climate projections, starting to kind of see how our infrastructure can respond to that. What we're talking about here is particularly with the target approach, well, with all approaches actually, start to build this into the process, as Jesse was referring to. That should ensure that good smart decisions are being made, investments are being made earlier on, which starts to pay off in that ROI John was talking about with regards to the fact you are seeing reduced response costs and risk exposure in the future. So it's kind of, there's a very much a maturity curve associated with this. What a reactive position, I guess, means is that you are kind of deferring a lot of that and hoping for the best. And look, all councils are looking at what they need to invest in and they're probably trying to make the best decisions when making financial situations. There is just the target and accelerated space, the opportunities that these projects do need to compete with some of the other priorities that we're seeing across council. Deferring things and allowing them to just be run down to the ground can have some profound impacts when they are needed most after these events occur. So it is just, there's a complicated space to navigate.
So it might be that the targeted approach is what you want to do, but when we get into the actual projects in the capital program, you can't do all of this. So you're working towards being able to, the key thing is that we really understand what those high risk, high consequence, high criticality things are, and that we agree an approach that might happen a bit slower than this, but it's better than what's in the reactive option. So because as Bill said, you have to look at these against the other investments that we make. So the reality, well, sorry, that seems to be what I'm hearing from you actually, is that the reactive isn't really palatable going forward, but we still might have to make some choices in the things that we invest in, because there's a lot of cost in some of these
We don't know what
targeted
rating
investments.
impacts are.
You
We
don't
don't
know
know
what
what the
rating
impacts
impacts
on debt or capex or what
So the key thing for these resilience ones is that if the primary reason for doing it is resilience, then it will be 100% rates impact. Well, we will have other tools that we're going to talk to you about that could be used also for this, but it would be a resident impact as opposed to a growth impact, for example, like when we talk about other areas. Some of these also might get put together with growth though, for example. So Arthur's Point Bridge, if we are expanding the capacity of the bridge at the same time as we're increasing its resilience, you know, there may be an argument that's partially paid for by growth and partially paid for by existing ratepayers. So there's optionality within that, which is what Jesse was talking about before, which we get to at the next stage.
Okay, Brenton? Yeah, I mean, just wanted to signal, there's a couple of, you know, this is one of those areas where it's easy to go down rabbit holes.
Yeah.
And the point we need to be super careful is that we're strategically data, you know, and driven by foundational, you know, information. I just wanted, there's two areas which I just want to signal. I think we haven't done very well at, and that crosses over into that is one, we embarked on some stormwater mapping a couple of years ago to the point of putting it on people's limbs and things like that. But there's still some errors in that. We've never looped back around and actually fixed those. And I raised that with some staff the other day, but because somebody came to sell their house and they've still got a piece of mapping that's actually wrong. And it's already been acknowledged as wrong, it's just never been fixed. So there's you know, that was an area, yeah, we've got to be really careful that our information is correct. And we haven't ever closed the loop on that because a staff member left and we didn't come back and sort it out. So that's one area. And the other was wildfire risk, is that we got a bit excited about it a couple of years ago, and we've sort of come back and been a little bit more pragmatic around some of those things, but there were some big numbers assigned to, very unscientifically assigned to wildfire management, that we need to be clearer around what we are going to do, how much it's going to cost, and actually, is it going to work? Because that $20 million just lumped in a box wasn't ever useful. It needed to be very targeted and strategic. So, yeah.
Observation question, and you deal with it later, but for instance, here on the comparison of options and accelerated, and just using Edith Cavell as an example, every dollar spent on Edith Cavell ticks 2 boxes, resilience and grow well, and a bunch of other boxes. So something tells me, and I'd like to have that disproven, that every dollar spent on an accelerated also goes into grow well. And so in fact, looking at these, I know you haven't, later on you combine everything, but something tells me that everything that we spend in accelerated ticks a lot of other boxes. So in fact, we're not being aggressive. If we were to adopt that $1.5 billion, we would actually be eating every dollar for dollar right into the infrastructure deficit. Could you disprove that?
It's an interesting observation, and from my perspective, I'll at least talk. You know, ag growth represents a growing, I guess, risk exposure. You know, the more people we bring into this district, the more kind of exposed to risks they are, and therefore, you know, as you said, the investments we are seeing, you know, are a commensurate response to that growth challenge. We are investing the right levels of kind of infrastructure to support the growing population. These are the new thoughts.
Maybe what would you say? It'll be quite specific to the thing you're talking about, I think, the particular infrastructure you're talking about.
No.
You mean because I cherry picked Edith Cavell?
Yeah.
Okay, well, but I can, whether it's power lines or Edith Cavell or another bridge or roads, it looks to me like every dollar spent ticks other boxes. And so for me, that argues very strongly for using resilience as well as grow well as a case for further government funding and higher rates.
This expenditure isn't in addition to the expenditure we would recommend in our infrastructure types. This would just guide the extent to which we recommend these infrastructure types. So Edith Cavell is actually a great example. There will be a significant growth component to that, and the level of resilience we bake into that and the surrounding network would be guided by your long-term infrastructure strategic intentions. So it wouldn't be just because we're saying it's an important investment as part of resilience, that's not necessarily going to.
Okay, well, just for argument's sake, I don't see any dollar that's spent on accelerated that also doesn't hit grow well. Maybe there is a dollar, but everything seems to tick two boxes.
So wildfire mitigation, if we Gorge Road responses in Glenorchy, flood protection specific investments probably don't hit grow well, other than the fact that the risk of the consequence probably increases the more people that you have in the proximity of the hazard. So if it's a hazard specific response, it probably doesn't hit grow well. But if it's also a piece of infrastructure, if you're talking about a piece of infrastructure that is like a bridge or a road or something like that, then you'll be right. It's hitting multiple things.
But these things enable us to grow well, whether we can actually recover them through a growth funding mechanism, depends on whether they release on capacity.
Because, there's an argument that Glenorchy is an important visitor destination. So actually there's that growth in the visitors. So while it may not be hitting the growth in the residents, we've got that visitor growth too that could be impacted.
Actually, I'm just going to correct what I said as well. Like up here on Gorge Road, if depending on how much was invested in mitigating the risk there, that could result in more development being able to happen there than is currently enabled. So that was to someone's point before about only building in places where, in the right place.
That's true in
if you can
several
mitigate
areas.
the hazards.
Yeah, whether it's fire and other risk.
There's a lot of points. Basically, this looks like what's political appetite. Political appetite is tied to community buy-in, and community buy-in is tied to whether or not they believe in the story behind it. They reflect on rewiring Aotearoa's sort of shift to being New Zealand-made energy, not about, the climate or about carbon emissions, but about the sort of independence, which I think people get a lot of buy-in, and it's like climate resilience. And you were talking before about how do you distinguish between climate and resilience? It's like resilience from climate affairs, I guess. But I know that people are far more motivated around resilience than they are around proactive climate mitigation, the other stuff. So, I can foresee, I really appreciate what Jessie said in terms of a culture of resilience in new infrastructure. So like with Alptown Bridge, we've got an earthquake-proof pipe, or one that's flexible. So everything that we build new, we're building with a sense of resilience. And then what's left is most likely politically popular projects, whether that's like electrifying the pools or doing solar, because you can get enough buy-in from the community to go, this is a little bit more, but this is a more holistic benefit. Not to say that's the right or wrong, but I think that's sort of where we're going to end up landing. So
I think part of that, setting that context is right. We could do everything. We had the money, and I think from a community perspective, as we know, what people are prepared to pay for before something's happened is totally different to what they think you should have spent after it's happened. Okay? But that is always, sorry, you need to, move away from that area. It's not saying you don't make me move my house, or why didn't you make me move my house? Okay, so that's the tension we've got. I think it's really key that on something like this, or probably quite a few other things. As we agree our investments for the long-term plan, we say this is what we're doing, but we also say this is what we consider, but we're not doing, and this is our why. This is why we're not doing this, because I don't think we're good at saying why we're not doing things, or even actually saying what we consider, but we ended up not doing. Because so I think that way, otherwise people just focus on what you are doing, as they say, but mine's not on that list or whatever. So I think to be able to not justify, but just to be able to talk about why we're not doing some of the things that we could do is good. Yeah, it's probably good. I'm just going to do a sense check on timing.
Yes, we do need to move on to the next one, so.
Okay,
yeah.
I mean, again, it's another discussion. We could carry on with,
Yeah.
I think for now, if everyone's okay, let's do anything burning. Nikki, you've got your hand up. Is there anything particular?
Oh, I just wanted to say I support option 2. If you read through the expected outcomes, I can't go near option 1. I think we need to shift it up, and I agree with Gavin, we can phase it over time.
Thank you.
But in response to seeing how the extra money actually delivers, we need
That's right.
frameworks in place.
So
Thanks.
getting back to my original question, some of these things are actually statutorily required.
Yeah.
We have to, in the emergency management bill, we're going to be required to have a recovery plan, and the standards for that will be very high. And that will be able to be better represented, because the accelerated approach, basically, if we don't do that, there's a whole lot of residual risk that will then come to pass when a major flood or weather event or earthquake happens. So this is actually going to be really helpful if it does what John describes. The other thing is that the EOC requirement will be in the new standards that come in, and although there's excellent capability in staff, we need facilities that will be able to deliver that. So, but the expectation is that will improve over time. So yes, we can mature that, and so we can build that in here. I think targeted with a view to some of the aspects of accelerated will be justifiable, and will move us on really well.
Cool. Is that?
Yeah. So just to play back on this one, I think what we're taking away is the direction is targeted, but when we bring back the actual investment, there will be still choices you can make within that. It will show the must-dos versus the
nice to haves.
The areas where there's more discretion.
Okay.
What we're just still working through is when you get the capital program, will there be an extract that is these are all the resilience things, or within each of the activities you might get a view of, well, in transport, here's the transport program, this and this are the resilience, the things that have a resilience impact, and the, you know, what the consequence of not doing it is. We're just still working out which way to present that, but it will come back.
But both might be
Yeah,
good.
probably both, yeah. So I've also captured that we need to make sure we've factored in those specific hazard response pieces of work that have been in play for some time, Quentin, per your comment, like Forge Road, Manoki. I suspect there's a reason why they're not specified here to do with the discussions we're having with ORC. We'll just make sure that's clear in terms of, but they should be factored in here. We need to be clear that this is the story around overall resilience, not climate resilience, is an important part. And we'll we'll need to, so what the infrastructure strategy will do is it will show what we're not doing, because that's the scenario you didn't choose. So when that is set out, we'll make sure that it's described in a way that we capture what we're not doing by taking this investment pathway. And it is already part of our capital program work to identify the consequence of not investing, which I think is really important in the resilience space, because that's where you bring through the risk you're trying to mitigate by doing the project. Yeah. And there were lots of other comments there. They're just they're the specific things that we're going to take away to build into that next phase. Yep.
Okay, we'll have a quick comfort break. Yeah. Right, I think we should carry on. We've got 65 minutes to complete the mission this morning.
Challenge or
yeah, so back to your end of the table.
Excellent. All right.
Okay, so hang on, I've just been asked to re-check in that for resilience, that we're working towards targeted as the option. But with a view that, you know, we might want to move towards accelerated later on. So we're setting it up in that way. Yep. Yep. Okay. So we'll bring you back options with some extra things if you decide you would like to pay for that. Yeah.
The reflection was that until we know the money, we don't really, we'll do as much as we can, as soon as we can, but you can't afford to do it, so you pick it back. I mean, it's just, that's what happens.
And back to Jude's point, if there are things that happen through growth that we have the opportunity within that to build a more resilience, let's take that credit as well.
Well, do you know what would respond well to growth and resilience? An aerial roadway. Let's talk about that on the 14th.
Just one.
Well, they can take many forms. They can be an integrated network. They could all look the same. They could look different.
Okay, we have,
Next topic.
so we haven't got time to go there.
All right. Thank you, Brian. So we all change gears now. We are starting to move into the other area that occupies a lot of my focus, which is understanding the impacts of on the environment and what we can do, particularly with regards to some of the key commitments this council has made, but also our community expect with regards to looking after Te Taio. The first thing you may know, previously, the current infrastructure strategy talks about our infrastructure will have low impact on the environment. Right? That's the significant decision area that's there at the moment. There has been a shift in terms of how we're framing this, providing infrastructure for a thriving Te Taio. So this isn't about just low impacts, about mitigating the bad things that can occur. This is about actual direct investment in Te Taio and understanding, where we do have infrastructure, what are the beneficial outcomes that can occur from that, but also let's clearly surface the investments council's already making in regards to a thriving Te Taio. So largely this plays into a lot of catchment restoration work that projects that have been committed to and which are being highly successful, and supporting that integrated kind of catchment restoration work that's happening. So in this space, infrastructure, I do want to kind of take the first step of broadening, I guess, the definition of infrastructure. Traditionally, it's always considered to be the built environment, the things that we can see and engineer. Natural infrastructure is very much a core phrase these days. There's been some really significant work recently at the national level with regards to New Zealand's natural infrastructure plan. So understanding that we do get service levels from natural environments, that there is important benefits that do come from it, that our communities certainly are the recipients of. So understanding just that vital role that nature does play in nature-based solutions as not just an alternative, but actually often a better investment. So that sets a little bit of the tone for this planning setting. So within this, we are talking about a few different things. We are talking about that direct investments that we do see in Te Taio. So there are quite a significant parts of our capital program, particularly in the park space, where we are seeing some significant projects. Project Tohu is a good example, as well as kind of looking at commitments around some other catchment restoration and reserve investments that is occurring. There are benefits that flow through the catchment and into the areas that our community value. So those are a really important subset of the investment opportunities in the space. But more broadly speaking, as Jesse was alluding to before, the way in which we manage our decision making in the infrastructure space, from what we need to build right through to what a good solution looks like, to how we deliver and then how we monitor the benefits from it, there is a really important, maturity step that we can take in this space to ensure that environmental biodiversity impacts and opportunities are baked into that process. So particularly this is often framed as a whole of life assessment. When we're looking at infrastructure investments, how are we looking at the whole of life assessment to understand what the energy use for this infrastructure investment may look like, to understand what the impacts upon environments and biodiversity may look like, to look at the carbon emissions, both embodied when we build it, but also the operational emissions associated with its use. To look at the energy side of things as well. Can we recycle the energy? Can we look at the efficiency of our energy use and not have an asset that kind of may cost be relatively inexpensive up front, but costs us a lot to maintain going forward? How do we look at aspects around the circular economy, how we build the projects, looking at the waste that comes from it, understanding how best we can kind of create those circular economy outcomes. And then how we measure and monitor, the project itself and the infrastructure long term. So there's a lot of kind of guiding principles that we're applying in this space, and looking to build upon the maturity that we've already started to embed across the organisation. Demand management is probably an important one in this topic too. How best can we look at the demand that's driving, the need for this infrastructure, and look at reducing that peak level demand to ensure that the right level of investment is being made. the future. So a lot of those best practice principles are embodied, I guess, in this planning setting. There's been a lot of work in the last few years to look at, what decisions we've made in the past, how we've kind of taken on new principles and building them into projects. I think I'll steal your phrase, Jess. We've done a lot of good work, but it's ad hoc, right? So we've got some really fantastic examples of best practice and some less glaring examples where there's some of those considerations haven't been factored into the project. So trying to build that consistency in terms of how we're approaching infrastructure and ensuring that natural infrastructure is very much a key focus as well as built environment. So that's kind of what's wrapped up in this particular planning setting. There is some options papers around whole of life assessment, the way in which you apply that are kind of being worked through at the moment. And one key thing is that you can look to apply that a bit like through a resilience lens across everything, or you can be relatively targeted in regards to those projects that have the highest level of potential impact. Because as we look at these kind of these planning settings and the question of how broadly you apply it as part of the, I guess, the maturity as an organisation and the cost implications that go from it as well. So that's a bit of a sense for how we're approaching this particular planning setting. What we're
Sorry, Bill, can I just, this also includes targeted investments in natural infrastructure itself. So projects that are purely designed to advance objectives in relation to biodiversity or environmental regeneration. So it's a mixture of both how we ensure those outcomes are met through infrastructure projects and also projects whose objective is purely that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Indeed. So that's a lens we apply across all asset categories: waste, transport, social, roading, as well as kind of what we look at, particularly with direct investments and the opportunity to, I guess, we've got a lot of good plans out there, a lot of good strategies, but how do we look at supporting the delivery of those? Blue-green networks, a really good example of that. So as we look across the options and narrowing that exists in the space, we can, very similar to the previous one, we can look at baseline environmental performance. So at its most basic level, there are requirements that we need to meet, particularly from a consenting point of view. So we can choose to, I guess, operate at that baseline compliance level. We're essentially mitigating the impacts, the negative impacts that you might see from infrastructure. You're doing it, so maintain, obviously, a state of compliance against RMA and environmental requirements. Maybe looking at some ad hoc opportunities that do exist, but certainly, and kind of continuing, I guess, to support existing projects that have already been committed to. So that represents a baseline where we are seeing kind of existing levels maintained, but nothing aspirational, I guess, in terms of how we're looking at our investment portfolio to mirror, I guess, some of the commitments that this council has made. If we take that up a level, we are looking at more targeted improvements. So we are looking at both system investments in terms of a whole of life assessment process across how we approach infrastructure, looking to build in some of those best practice tools that we're now seeing that kind of consider all of these variety of aspects, everything from embodied carbon through to environmental considerations, understanding energy and circular economy impacts into how we're looking at our projects, then looking at specific investments that can be made. We're calling out energy in the space. There's a resilience angle to some of our energy investments, but also there is a significant environmental, I guess, aspect to a lot of these investments as well. As we look at renewable options and starting to kind of build in that energy efficiency and driving some of that new technology adoption as a lead organisation. We're also, as Penny, we mentioned, targeted natural infrastructure investments. We have Project Tobu underway, but there's a variety of other opportunities, particularly with our blue-green network planning, to understand where can we start to look at ensuring that we're prioritising those environmental considerations within our growth planning and bringing some of that focus into what those natural corridors look like, both for green corridors, but also importantly for the freshwater and blue corridors as well. So targeted environmental program will kind of look at those opportunities that exist to kind of step up above the baseline level of performance and kind of look to an appropriate level of investment that supports some of the strategic ambition the council has stated, particularly around biodiversity and environmental outcomes. this approach also kind of strengthens that demand management focus. You know, it's not always about building to peak demand. You know, has to be a point where, I guess, the levels of consumption that do exist in this district, you know, I kind of started to, you know, some of that focus on public education awareness that brings it down. There's a lot of focus, you know, for example, in the power space and understanding when peak demand occurs. Obviously, water has been a big consideration in the last few years as well, in terms of the capital water usage rate. So that kind of demand usage is a key part of the framing in this particular planning segment. And finally, delivering a green infrastructure system. So there is a significant amount, I guess, of opportunity that does exist when we're looking at the large spend that occurs in infrastructure to say, well, how can that be directed towards some of these heightened levels of biodiversity and environmental outcomes? So embedding some of this practice across all of our infrastructure investments, you know, particularly looking at, you know, how, from a system point of view, how we look at track embodied carbon, how we look at some of those operational opportunities, particularly around energy efficiency and investments that get made in that space. We can pull forward some of those energy efficiency projects, the larger kind of more, you know, community scale ones, looking at how those can be applied across our portfolio. And we can also increase the investment that occurs in blue-green network and other similar kind of catchment restoration programs. So that's kind of the three options that we provided there. So not too dissimilar to the resilience planning setting. Now, we've made some quite significant commitments and progress in the last few years with regards to what we're seeing in this space. The question really kind of comes down to council's appetite to continue to see that being applied through that capital investment program.
Cool. Cody and then Nikki. Great stuff, and I don't want to labour any previous points, but I mean, I guess I also see this in the culture of what we see as an expectation, and especially around growth. I get frustrated with developments like Alpha Series and Northlake, creating problems with Bullet Creek and with Rockabilly Gully that, you know, prime fast profits and socialise the costs. So afterwards, the community coming in and paying for it. When you pitch it as, you know, we could invest in it, I don't think we should be the one investing in it. I think we should be one setting the baseline. If growth doesn't enhance the environment, it degrades it. And I think we need to ensure that we have tools and measures within our mechanisms for growth that ensure that that's BAU, doing a natural infrastructure that's not going to create adverse effects to the health of the lakes and rivers. And so I think it's a values thing as much as it is a capital thing. I love that, you know, this is so well integrated, as you say, with the thinking, and want to keep that going. But you know, from the lens as well, protecting the ratepayer from always being the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. So.
Nikki.
Yeah, similar sort of thing. Like, obviously, I support taking a step up in this area. It's just important that, again, bang for buck, how we do it. And we're obviously doing a number of things already. How do we just do those things better? And how much of that is about culture, and how are the ways that we can, and as Cody said, the tools that we have that allow us to influence the things that everybody else does. So it's a case of, I support a step up. It depends obviously on rating impact, you know, how much, but just want to see it, if we do step it up, it needs to be not undermined by the existing culture within parts of the organisation or undermined by our district plan. Those things need to be part of the shift, if that makes sense. Not throw money at stuff when there's underlying problems that haven't shifted. But I do support a lift to option 2. My dream would be option 3, but step by step, right? And all subject to rating impact. And I think part of the thing is smart funding and financing, and shifting as much as we can onto development, and doing as much as we can within what we're doing already, but doing it better.
Thanks,
that makes sense.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I think what comes across is actually doing more in this space is actually a way a lot cheaper than doing more in a lot of other spaces. So that's the good news, you know, and it may be one of our growth areas. Couple of thoughts and questions really. I guess, you know, if we're looking at something like active transport routes, can we link that back to this, because it is enhancing our environment, because we're looking at supporting that motion, which and so I'd be interested to see that. And then, sort of, if we're looking at stormwater retention on new developments, because obviously the developer would just like to have a big pipe that takes it somewhere, so they don't have to set land aside for stormwater retention. But from an environmental point of view, maybe managing stormwater on site is the preferred option. How do we balance that tension between they put it in a pipe and send it somewhere else, which obviously costs more for us, versus putting that cost back onto the developer? How do we achieve that outcome?
I'm going to pass to you guys, given that I'm not probably in the moment. What's your thoughts on?
From an infrastructure perspective, I don't think there's a lot we can do in terms of what developers do or don't do in terms of packaging their infrastructure, right? If they put forward a compliant solution, there's not much that compels us to decline that. So changes to your planning settings could be one way of addressing that. Another option could be to actually fund the solution you want to see up front and structure that funding in a way that recovers that cost from the development over time, something like an IEF. You might recall there was a lot of money ring-fenced for a stormwater solution in the Eastern Corridor in Te for in the LTP, and the intent there is actually fund the localised detention solution and recover that from the development over time. So it's another way, but I get that there's some risks attached to that.
And what becomes really important there is the statement of expectations with the water entity, because they're responsible for stormwater, but making sure that the blue-green network plan is actually a critical component of that, because that sets that expectation and baseline around the nature-based solutions and the good practice we want to see. So embedding that in the expectations that we have for the water entity is really important, and having that relationship where we can work together on those things so that they will look at options like that instead of just deferring everything to developers. So that integrated partnership with the water entity and the setting of expectations based on the blue-green network will be important. But as Jessie says, there is only so much you can do within the settings. You have to take some different approaches to work around that. So we'll have to work with the water entity on that in the future.
And there's but the code of practice for land division subdivisions, critical part of that under constant review. It's under review at the moment, particularly with regards to some of those stormwater considerations.
Do we put policy in there?
Yeah,
I think the code of practice is going to be a national code of practice.
Is it?
Certainly in some spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's going to be national engineering standards, so that councils can't do with that. That's still in development though.
We are looking at the nature-based guidance around how we're kind of taking that and looking at the best practice examples, and certainly ensuring that the focus is on that level of kind of investment.
Okay, but presumably we're going down the road of developer agreements. At any point that's some of our wiggle room to do that. That's good. John, and then Cody, and then
what we were talking about earlier in relation to the trajectory of projected growth, even if we prefer option 2, that would only keep us where we are. I think to be able to increasingly protect a more threatened environment because of the rate of growth, we need to, I think, take something more like option 3 as at least as our philosophical approach, because otherwise we're just going to stand still while all the rest goes on. I think quite a few of the options within those 2 options, though, I think maybe John was alluding to that, are actually at least cost neutral over time because they're more efficient. So I think we need to build that in more. I really think that we need to consider taking a more aggressive approach, because otherwise I don't think will make the impact that we need to. And getting back to that argument or that discussion about who's going to pay for it, that much of this is about mitigating the impacts of rapid growth. So therefore, growth should be able to fund aspects of this. However that's done is another question. Thank you.
Just quickly, how do we do it at Lake Hayes? How do we do it at Lake Hayes? We've essentially got, no development can degrade the quality of Lake Hayes.
I know that should be our new gold standard across the.
When we talk about not having the tools, and we've already got the tools, we've already used them, and it's already proven to work. When you go to the Alpine Lakes,
got so bad that then once that.
There may be others in the room who can talk about how that policy was actually put in place. But certainly
It was put in through the Wakatipu Basin land change, and it was a appeal by the Friends of Lake Hayes that progressed it to that point or defended it to that point. But it was, I mean, it is one of the few examples of a policy that's landed in the right place. But
whether that's a big rule that's in the district plan will still be in existence when we get our new planning zones.
Well, this is
that's the question.
And this is the bit that I was just going to get back to. I mean, I'm struggling because we're talking about these things largely in isolation of affordability and what's coming about here is there are things we are wanting to do that we simply don't have the mechanisms to do. So what we need to be talking about is money and mechanisms, not about what we want to do. We know what we want to do. And I just wanted to.
We need that direction from what you want to do. That's what we're looking to establish.
I don't think that's changed, to be fair. And I mean, well, look, I get we're going through a process, but these things don't make sense without the affordability lens. They don't make sense without having a mechanism to deliver them. And I mean, we touched on the policy, the IFF or whatever it is, but and the transport stuff. I mean, we simply need to be, dealing to the mechanisms by which we're going to help solve these problems. Going to recover more costs. Going to, the development contributions, the funding mechanisms, the policy directions that we need to. And I know we're limited by government, but to be fair, that's the conversations I want to be having.
And I think you're bang on point. It's a conversation we want to have. It's a conversation that follows. As you've seen here, the complexity in this pack, there's 3 different options Bill's given you there. We want to we'd really like to pick one of them and come back to you with a fulsome overview of it, because we're going to try and do all 3 to come back with all that data up front. That's a huge workload. I've just come back to your point about Lake Hayes as well. That is a really interesting one because it's not just policy that has got it to where it is today. It's also been partnerships with groups like Mana Tahuna, it's been the Waifaka Arts and Strategy, it's been the engagement with iwi, it's been the interface with the catchment management plans and the kind of precedent that is set there that can then be replicated in other places. So the policy, yes, it opened the door, but then it was the willingness of a whole variety of community groups to collaborate, participate, find pathways through, find alternative funding to bring that to life. So it's that soft infrastructure piece as well.
I think, as you put it rightly, it's a precedent. And I think if we can take that and extrapolate it into everything else we do, there's lots of partnerships in stormwater space on Upper Clutha that we can leverage in order to deliver on the same objectives. I guess it's just to reinforce not a culture of submission of going, we don't have the tools. It's like, look, we've already had the tools and we've been using them successfully. So how can we sort of infect that?
Although I think John has a point that there's a question mark over whether we'll even have that tool available to us with the new planning environment.
Yes.
I don't know the answer to that, but it's designed to prevent us from doing things like that.
It was Melissa, then Nikki, and then I think you.
Yeah, whether we do or not, I think it's worth fighting for, not just for Lake Hayes, but for the wider district. However that may look into the future. So, and I guess my question is the same as last round in terms of looking at these 3 options. Where do we currently sit? I don't feel like we currently sit at baseline, but maybe I'm not right.
I would put us in a very similar position for resilience. We are certainly going beyond what many other councils do in this space.
Yeah.
So I think it's a position that reflects the environment and privilege of living here, but it's also nice to see that we are kind of looking to kind of adopt best practice that we are seeing around where those examples are and putting into early use here in the district. So we are probably in a space, particularly if you look at the scale of those investments that are being directly made in the parks team. Credit to them, and I think we all kind of celebrate some of the wins we're seeing. But there's a lot more that can be done. We've got a Bluegreen Network plan, for example, that's got nothing, no funding really to help delivery of that.
Does
So
a
the
lot more,
aspiration-
so our current approach is baseline.
Our current
Our approach is baseline. Our aspiration is definitely, as outlined in our CBP and in some of the other work that we talk about, is more targeted. But what we tend to do is those things we highlight, like even just the energy projects, they're in the LTP, but they don't get prioritised. So what targeted does is it brings those forward and has a real focus on them. So there's definitely a desire in our current planning to do something that's more like option 2, but we don't get to it because they're the things we always trade off against the other things that we have to do.
So you're saying bring it into the 3 years of the
Although I can't, again, there's a cost implication to that, and these were the things that we traded away last time for our must-dos, where we had to fill up the first 3 years with things we had to do, to John's earlier point.
If I can say, look, one of the things we're trying to achieve from this is to move from the ad hoc process. So look, we've got ad hoc examples of best practice and also many others. Now that's because of the nature of the optioneering that exists. Right, we'll take this opportunity here. So through this discussion, we'll kind of get some consistency in terms of what we are actually trying to do, and particularly as we work across all the different directorates, understanding everyone's role that can be played and where these kind of priorities are that we're trying to set. Okay, so Nikki.
Thanks. First question, because the decision's sort of cost looms, so that line that you've put in there, 30-year capex and opex impact, that influences, people's thinking. Where did they come from, Bill? Sorry. Roughly, where did you get, say, the uplift from option 2 capex at 55 to 110 million to option 3, 110 to 200? Are they indicative, largely sort of guesswork, or? Yeah, and I think this is. Oh no.
Can I respond? Yeah, I can respond to that, Nikki. So at the moment we do have long lists, all right. So as we kind of start to apply a lens across those and understanding timing, and what that cost may look like. So it is very much early indication, So these are raw estimates that have to go through. But we've done our best to kind of try and look at what a delivered program to align with those options would look like. So that's where the costings or the cost estimates that you see on this. Front of you have come from.
Right, so if we pick an option, you'll be able to flesh it out more in reasonable time, like this is what it actually looks like?
That's what will come through when you get the CAPEX program. So these are high level estimates at the moment based on high level kind of responses, programs that sit underneath. We can't go and do the detailed planning and modelling for all of these different options, which is why we need some direction. We then will flow that down into the more detailed project level programs that come through to you.
Next question is just of that 110 to 200 million, say I'm looking at medium term option 3, how much of that is additional money tagged to projects that would go ahead anyway to green them up? Is that part of that?
There's an estimate in there, yeah. So as we look at, if you are looking at existing projects and you are looking to apply a heightened level of assessment across them, there will be some degree of, I hate to call it green premium, but that's kind of potentially what's there. You may also find some very smart solutions that offset those costs. But there is a little bit of an estimate in there.
Okay, I guess my concern is that, if there's cost on, we go out and we go, yep, okay, we can get a green report. But then if the quality of that report is not quite what we needed and is sort of skewed a little bit based on inputs, we could end up spending an awful lot of money, without actually achieving anything. We could end up with a bunch of assessments that lead us in the direction of don't spend that money, we don't need to. I guess if we're spending some OPEX, we need to do some work across our system, across our culture, across the board in this place to help make sure that, you know, we get really good environmental risk reporting when we're making decisions to make sure there's some basic stuff that we don't do now that doesn't necessarily cost an awful lot. That should be factored in, and it doesn't seem to come. So that's my only wariness in committing. So the intention of option 3 is what I want. The funding of option 3, I'm like, is there a different way to get there? And when I look at, I'm just want to bring back to the purpose of the infrastructure strategy, which is to identify our infrastructure issues over the period covered by the strategy and the principal options for managing those issues. We need to stop talking just about our budgets and our capex and opex and projects, I guess, and start talking more, as Quentin said, I'm just reiterating now and reiterating what Cody said about DCs, planning frameworks. What is the best bang for buck way to achieve the outcomes in option 3, which I think is where we all want to get to? And it's not necessarily through capital projects, because the issues for our infrastructure are much broader than what we spend on specific projects. Okay, I'll stop talking and maybe put it down on paper, because it doesn't make that much sense, does it? But I just think we need to go broader with our infrastructure strategy. It needs, sorry, one more thing, it needs to not just inform capital projects, it needs to inform the code of practice, it needs to inform our planning decisions, it needs to sit above those other things to help solve the issues. Thanks.
I think what I'm hearing again, it's a very similar theme across the different options that you've spoken to during this workshop. It is about systems change. It is about some cultural change. And, you know, there's different elements to this that would need to be applied in these different planning lenses that we're looking through. But I think that's well understood, and that's why these are looking out over quite long timelines. So you know, these aren't things that would get shifted within the first year of operation. Like this needs to be planned out as a sort of methodological approach. And your point about, you know, we don't want to be throwing good money after bad around poor analysis. I think that we could apply that to every element of our business. We absolutely do not want to be doing that. So I think, you know, if we're going to make a bit of a gear change in the environmental space, these are all the things that we need to be thinking about as managers, not systems.
So I guess, yeah, I mean, closing that one out, then some of these subject areas, be it resilience or totality, you know, we should be seeing these business cases from across the organisation, no matter what the project is, whether it's a new library, sports hall, active transport, they should be specifically speaking to these things, so we can see, is this project also going to turn about, or does it take us in the right direction, you know, sort of, or actually if we did a bit more on that project, would it take us further up? Because that's the business case, and that's...
These strategic directions that you're setting through the LTP, we would want to find a way to institutionalise throughout the way that we work and the way that we're servicing information to you and advice to you and the decisions that you make, so that you've got that clear line of sight, helping create the approach in the organisation. That's the purpose.
Particularly materials opposite to that system investment. So, well, this is where the priorities for the organisation are. So let's see what projects, how projects can live up to those and find those opportunities.
I think what's important to note just for these as well, in terms of the costs, is when you get it through the capital program, you'll also see whether the implementation of the project, if there's an impact on, there's a revenue impact, an OPEX impact that comes with this, positive as well as negative. So these energy projects, for example, actually have a positive impact on reducing energy costs in the future. So that will come through if you look at the individual investments, whereas this is just the cost. Sorry.
I just want to make the point that it came through very clear in that DNA report that we received. Not to confuse on that, but the DNA report, that our environment was one of the key things. So I'd actually like us to be more aspirational and head towards option 3. Again, I don't like the size of some of those numbers, but in terms of our thinking about our environment and where we head to, that's where I'd like us to be thinking on that side. Personally.
Just make one of the benefits of the Lake Hayes example is that it was animal. There was a whole lot of people who had real interest in that, well, from their values, but also for some of them business interests, and then aligned with where we were at. So maybe it's in that space where the dollar figure could potentially be reduced from our side by enabling that kind of ad hoc approach to partnerships, to co-funding, to collaboration, because it's a shared set of values that that could end up, but the value in the end would be probably multiplier of what you're suggesting there.
It's a quick response to that. Yeah, I agree entirely. I think it's much more mature than the ad hoc approach, particularly as we look at these integrated catchment groups. There's one for the entire district. And this is where quite a structured approach to saying how do we realise these investment opportunities. Funding is one of those important subgroups that has been set up as we start to see what those opportunities look like. Cool.
So in terms of direction, I'm hearing a real mixed bag actually about we want to go for green, we want to go for 3. In terms of what we're going to take away for our planning, I guess, for direction for the next phase of the investment program. So if we take targeted as the baseline, and then you'll be able to see the cost implication of that flowing through. And then we could have a discussion in that next session about the capital program to see if you have any appetite to go up. Because I suspect that conversation when we come to the capital program is going to be, this is a very expensive program. So this might be an area where you might want to increase to decrease somewhere else. But if we take the baseline as targeted into that next phase, does that sit okay with everybody?
Well, everyone would actually like to do more.
Yeah.
But we don't know what the consequences are. So I'm sort of wondering why we were asked in the first place, to be fair, because, you've heard that people want to be aspirational, but we're being picked back into something else, but which is sort of my point.
Okay, so we'll go
This process doesn't make sense without the rest of the context, and I'm sorry.
I mean, next question.
I know, but we can't. The point is that it's meaningless for us to say that we want to be more aspirational at this point of time when that option isn't going to be available to us. I'm sorry.
We have to have some assumptions to take into our more detailed capital program. Otherwise, what we do is we bring you a program and then we've chosen whether you're leaning in or we're leaning away. And so this part of the process is to make sure that we are bringing you something that is leaning in the right places. And if this is an area where you want us to, the capital program we bring you in the next phase can lean into this area more.
I think
that's why we want to
I think it needs to, I think everyone understands would support that. The trade-offs will come when we see what the consequences are. And it might be, okay, well, it might lead us to a discussion about we may not have the money for that, but who else might? And actually, whereas if some of those things weren't even on the page, we wouldn't be thinking about them. So I think it's actually easier to start high and rule things out after discussion than not have visibility of some of those things because you sort of set the bar at a certain level. I don't know. I think on this would probably.
I think we'll go with option 3, and I appreciate the frustration on this, but in previous years we wouldn't have bought it this early, and actually officers would have made these calls. Would have said, oh well, we know this council really wants to lean into X or Y, and we would have done that. So we're bringing that back to the table to make sure that governance is giving the strategic direction rather than us thinking we know what we think on these matters.
I think to help clarify, because it's like sort of missing the values and vision at the start because we're looking at everything as the capital program. So it's like, what capital cost? I think what we're trying to say is we want you to spend some operational budget on figuring out the systemic issues that are happening, which, maybe that costs $10, $20 million, whatever, but like there's the money that we spend, but there's also the time that we spend on what we spend doing. So that's where I see this is about the culture, the baselines, the limits, the systems, the values. None of those things have a price tag attached to them, but they're all
wound into the OPEX numbers in there.
Sorry?
They're wound into the OPEX in here. Which are kind of little blocks rather than dollars.
And that's what I'm trying to sort of clarify, and I guess just to daylight frustration, is that we don't see this as a capital thing, it's a operational. Anyway, I don't want to steal Alison's time if I really bad.
I suppose it's why I was to acknowledge this is kind of district think capital cost, right? So even as early as next week when there's some backwards activity based you'll see that there's some very early thinking around potential funding and partnering options to deliver. Then we'll do more work around that as we translate it to a detailed capital plan.
It's a shame Simon wasn't here to see this. Or me. Simon's going to have some more work to do before you get your papers on Thursday. Okay, so we're going 3 on this one, but just testing back that we still going for targeted on resilience.
I should just point out here, because there's some capitals and exclamation marks in the chat from Nikki around plan change. So just to keep that in the mix as well as to whether that would be required.
Plan change.
To do option 3 affordably, we need a plan change.
It was highlighted in the climate biodiversity plan as one of the actions to implement some of the outcomes. And it's something we've never really been able to progress in terms of, or even what it would look like, because it's the limitations under the RMA, but the, you know, going to the points that Cody made about the policy in the locays and stuff like that, there are some levers that we can pull and we should be trying to pull them.
So we'll pick that up as an action here. I'll just put a caveat on it though, that we may not actually be able to answer that question because we don't know what the final form of the Planning Act will say, because we don't have it yet. Yeah. Unfortunately, what may happen is we may get it in the middle of this process. So yeah. So what we will have to do here is probably put in a placeholder for work to be done on that once we know what those final settings are. We need to talk to Dave and Ellie about that. So
you mentioned resilience and you said targeted, but I think that we were, and maybe I'm just speaking for myself, we were migrating towards accelerated. So we'd like to see we're somewhere in the gray area midway.
Yeah. Taking the growth. I mean, just going back to the point, my fear is that you ask the question is do you want to do a little bit an average amount or as much as you should? And you ask that question on any topic that's before us, with the environment, infrastructure, social, like community infrastructure, sporting facilities. We're always going to answer we want to do as much as we can, because that's, you know, that's the obvious outcome. So, you know, like I said, the frustration.
When more information comes about that, then you can make the trade-offs. You go,
That's my point.
But this is
Okay.
I think we're dangerously short of time. I think we need to round out this session on CapEx.
yes, so over to Ellie. Thank you for giving me a platform to talk about asset management. So look, it is fantastic that we're having a conversation about renewals, because I think renewals planning requires good asset management, and good asset management means understanding the strategic objectives that you've all talked about today, you know, the outcomes that you're trying to achieve with your investment. And renewals has historically been seen as not very exciting. I don't imagine why. And something that maybe we haven't wanted to put investment in. And I think we've had a couple of sessions on renewals, and hopefully you'll see the light that actually we need to protect the assets we've got, and that's what we really want to just take you through. So yeah, good asset management, you know, is about staff capability as well. It's about understanding the assets. It's about making sure you're appropriately using your OPEX budget so that you've got good data. You understand the condition of your assets. You understand the outcomes that you want to achieve, whether it's resilience, whether it's climate, and bringing it all together. What I would say when we're talking about a 30-year renewals investment profile, it does depend on a lot of the scenarios that we've just talked about. So if you're going to invest a lot of money in building new stuff, then that's going to have a downhill effect on, you know, we're going to have a potential renewals burden going forward. So, you know, it's all of these are interlinked, and I think it's been really great to have the opportunity to, you know, put the lens across all of these. We've talked in the last renewal session, we talked a bit about risk appetite, level of service appetite, and I think today, if I just to those next ones, really just wanted to talk about, you know, which levels of service are actually important to invest in renewals. I'm not, given the amount of time, we've got a lot of time to go, I don't really want to go for each of the individual scenarios, but I think we've talked about them previously. We could spend less now, but that's going to have an impact later on. We could spend more now, and you know, we'll have a great network. But actually, we need to be really pragmatic about the level and having attention to program at a program level, but also at an individual level. So Yeah, probably, maybe I put it to you guys. Have you got any questions around the level of comfort around what we're investing in renewals? Like personally, when we put, as good asset managers, when we put forward a renewals program, there's a huge amount of work that's happened in the background to have a tension program. It's tensioned at a strategic level, which is your guys' role is tensioned at a tactical level and tensioned at an operational level when we make individual decisions. I see Nikki's just put her hand up.
And I think to answer the question before someone asks it, because it's been asked in all the other ones, which one is what is aligned with how we approach it in the past and how you would be presenting a renewals program? That would be option 2, yeah?
Yeah.
Which is the balanced approach.
The baseline that we've done is actually that balanced approach.
Okay, Nikki.
Yeah, it's just that goes back to what we were talking about before, is how do we achieve the outcomes that we want to, doing what we'd already do, but maybe tweaked slightly. So it's just that interested in how you look at risk, natural hazard risk, other risks, and opportunities, which is, I guess, the other side of that when you're about to do a renewal. I mean, it can be same for same, or it can be a slight uplift, or it can be, how do you work through that process?
Yeah, so the whole renewals process is kind of a multi-criteria assessment. We know what assets we have. We know which are the important ones and which will have an impact of failure. We understand and we look at criticality. So, working closely with Bill, understanding some of those resilience challenges. For example, when we're looking at the roading network, we look at geotechnical hazards along the road and sort of understand those vulnerable areas. So we know that actually making sure that the slopes are stable, the roads are, built well so that we can protect them. So investing in roading renewals at, this pavement and surface and the road protection are absolutely fundamental. Like those are really important things that we focus on. Where it gets a little bit less clear is things like active travel. And I know, Quentin, you had a really good example in Wanaka the other day. Those are assets that deteriorate much slower. They have a much less impact if you don't invest in them. So we really need to understand what level you want to invest in them to make a really high level of service. Apart from the odd example, like Quentin managed to find, most of our network is in really, really good condition from a pathway perspective. And so we can take a little bit more risk there. And, we can get into a little discussion around that, but when we looked at actually probably the best way is to go back to here, we had the levels of service. We've kind of suggested some priorities around what's important to invest in, and it's really making sure that you guys are comfortable with that, so that when we do that renewals program, you can be really confident that we've tensioned at the programs at the various levels that I've talked to.
Yeah, so if we set direction around option 3, because I'm thinking these things don't need to be siloed. They'll be part of the infrastructure strategy and it will affect everything. If we set option 3 on environment, when you go to do something new, this is just really hypothetical, do you then pay more attention to the potential environmental opportunities through procurement and the design work and so on? How do you inform your decisions? Is it based on our risk framework? Is it based on the direction we go through the infrastructure strategy? Where does that come from?
Yeah, so I don't think our level of maturity is there that's what we've done up till now. But I think getting the clarity of the strategic direction and all of the things that we've just covered in the 30-year infrastructure strategy means that we can get better at doing that. So when we're doing a 10-year asset management plan, for example, the first thing that we look at is what is the 30-year infrastructure strategy telling us, and how does that inform at an activity level the response of investment? So by you guys giving that strategic direction, we can actually do that in the 10-year program. Unfortunately, the timing's probably not where you want it to be for this round, but I think the conversation that we're having now is so useful for us to actually make those, pull those levers as we go forward.
And you'll see option 3 for environment includes building the tools to enable us to do that.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that that's what the infrastructure strategy, was supposed to do, some of the direction in there, and that's what our risk appetite is supposed to do. So this comes back to, do we have to spend a whole lot of money to achieve this, or is it actually reasonably easy within the systems that we have, just making sure that people understand how they work, making sure they're integrated properly, and making sure we monitor and report them, so that some people aren't just ignoring the system, if that makes sense. We could probably achieve a lot.
Yeah, and
that
that's
way.
why asset management framework, and I know I drum on about this every time I see you guys. The asset management framework actually is there to enable you to connect your strategic objectives into your operational ones. And so it allows you to have that line of sight. And so when we've got clear strategic direction in the 30-year infrastructure strategy, we can apply that at those tactical and operational levels. But actually that is something that we have to consciously work on to achieve.
So I think it'd be really key to understand that, you know, if we're replacing an asset, what's the why? It's end of life, you know, or there's been regulatory change, so we have to do something to it, or you know, we're having to replace it because of growth, so to maintain so I think understand the why.
Yeah, so
because
renewals are a very small component of growth, but there would be very little. But we're trying to get smarter with renewals so that if there is a growth component, and I think Edith Cabell has talked about previously, but renewals is mainly driven by condition of your assets and making sure that you invest at the right time. So you either don't get an unplanned failure or that you can actually get the most optimal time to invest in it.
And then if we're talking about asset management like our roading network, you know, sort of what are the consequences of not doing certain things and how soon do they manifest themselves, and what's the trade-off between the capex investment and the ongoing operational costs? Because again, there's you can have an asset and you can keep it going, or you can replace it, right? So and there's different choices depending on.
Yeah, and if you really come and talk about how we do that, I certainly think.
I think that decision making, you know.
Talk about that in that workshop. Weren't you in the workshop?
Oh, probably was.
I feel like you went over that really well. So it's
Okay.
like, for example, Cardrona Valley Road, that was like 30-year end of life, and end of life not. So I feel like I got that.
Perfect, thank you. I was probably just too busy chairing it.
Maybe.
If I may, I know you've brought a lot of sophistication to this space. Do you feel like you're developing the tools that you need in order to do that smart thing, or you're in the process?
I think, well, I would say for each of the activity groups that we have, it's probably a different level of maturity. So we've been very fortunate having someone like NZTA actually really challenge us, and we get audited, you know, massive audits quite often about what tools we're using and how do we do that. So because we've got that co-funder, we've actually been pushed into that space. And I think that establishment of my team has really been to try and carry that maturity across into other activities. So I probably would say there is a lower level of maturity in those other activities, but we're really trying to systemize it. So it doesn't rely on people thinking about what and where and how do we make sure we do resilience, but actually the process is set out and actually, you know, about resilience or environmental controls, or how do we make sure that we look at opportunities to bring in growth opportunities at the same time, but that's reliant on the system, not people.
Great to hear. I love sort of the system-driven approach. It's one of our vulnerabilities. We have great people that leave. But I guess that's sort of the nuance of it is it's very data-driven, and that there's also a political body that'll go, oh, you know, everyone wants this road to be fixed, but you've got all the justification. How do you then tell the story, I guess to John's point, around your multi-criteria analysis? This is what we've looked at. This is why we said no to these. We're going to socialize it a bit more in the political environment.
Yeah, I mean, if that's the type of thing that you want to have more visibility of it, we certainly can. It's not easy, and it's hard to know. Our renewals budgets, for example, are program level budgets. So we don't give you a list of, you know, it's very operational, those decisions about which road or, you know, we do this road or that road. What I would hope is that we can give you confidence in the processes that we're following so that, you know, we are making the right decisions.
Okay. And looking at the spread between the different options, it's actually quite narrow. Yeah. So, you know, between the spend less and spend more, you're probably talking about 5 million a year over the 30-year plan. You know, so it's a very, very small difference between that. So, Eric, John.
Yeah, I'm not going to where we're going to go as far as preferences, but my concern, it does, so I'm glad you mentioned, Ellie, the resilience space. So because it's on the fringes that the problems tend to be. So there, you know, there are roads in the Hawkesbury Basin that are pretty marginal, sealed, largely, well, partly because we've taken on responsibility for them to some. Then there's the ongoing issues on Cardrona Road, particularly this side of it, with slips, you know, proactively dealing with that. And then there's the big issue just about the room if you need to, John, but the road to Kinloch, you know, where that was clearly a developing problem. And how do we, as an organisation, respond to those things in a way that mean it doesn't then become a crisis, and you have the entire political leadership, one political party stuck over in Kinloch for it, but amongst other things. So those sort of things, I think somehow we need to. Again, it gets back to the culture question. How do we deal with those issues more? Take more leadership, perhaps. And of course, then we've got the Skippers Bridge, which would blow the budget. Anyway, but those sort of things on the margin, but they can be quite critical.
So I think having good criticality frameworks when we're looking at renewals, like criticality is a key decision point when we look at renewals programs. Working closely with Val and understanding those, because you're right, it is at the fringes. And the difficulty that we've got where we have some of those key resilience issues is they are expensive and, you know, not easy solutions to follow. So I guess having that strategic direction that's a really key part, a key input into those renewals programs as part of that, and then what additional investment we want to do to focus on the, you know, targeted or accelerated resilience defences. Probably.
Yeah, it's a strong overlap.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. One question. Which of these options throws the most priority into cycle trails?
Well, I would say if you put on the, you know, the third option, there's no doubt we would put more money into walking and cycling and pathways. But that is an area when you look at affordability that we may, you know, but if you give me the direction that is one of the most important areas that we need to focus on, that's your prerogative.
That wouldn't be building new ones though, that's just renewing the ones we've got.
Yeah.
Is that renewing and upgrading? Or just,
So renewal, and if we're particularly looking at NZTA funded, it's a like-for-like replacement. So that's what we talked about, smart renewals, we would need to bring in our own unfunded CapEx probably because we're unlikely to get funding for that.
thank you. I had a sort of a similar question, but you know, you mentioned before that cycleways and walkways and better pathing is actually cheaper for us long term than roads. So can we have option 3, but actually the roads don't get as much of an effect, but the active trail networks do? Because ultimately that's the shift we're trying, or I think we're trying to go towards. Cheaper, better for the environment, better for the health.
Definitely, and I think there's a lot of areas where that get tension. I guess we're talking about resilience and criticality. The road networks is how we move up people around currently. So I would be hesitant to take money from making sure that our roads can stay open if you know, just to put it in footpaths. I think there's definitely a balance there, and it's not always easy.
But option 3 is making the roads great.
Well, no, I think it's looking at this levels of service. So, for example, what Ellie's identified here is that the roads being safe and, you know, able to move people around is high priority, but having smooth surfaces, not so high. So it's not just that you wouldn't say, you know, everything to do with the road is a priority. From a criticality perspective, making it able to minimise harm for all users is absolutely critical. But you might prioritise one of these others that relates to cycleways. Yeah, the bottom one, pathways are safe and accessible for users. Above services and corridors.
Yeah. So option 3 might say we have a really good level of investment in renewals in all of our asset groups. Whereas a balanced view might say we're going to invest renewals in those ones that are critical to running our network, but we might take a little bit more of a reactive approach to those assets that perhaps either deteriorate faster, slower, or they're less critical to having a reasonable level of service.
Or you might tell us when we do a balanced approach, and then when we come back with the capital program, you say, but we want higher priority put on cyclists.
But there's no order difference, isn't there, as well, between the roading network and the trails and footpaths network. So, you know, what would be a very small increase in roading costs would go a long way in trails and footpaths.
I think we're looking at it wrongly, actually, because I think what you've done, and your case has been very well demonstrated in roading, is you've told us how much is required. You've taken an objective approach to it, how much is required to maintain it in its current state or maintain that level of service. And my other argument with the active travel is we need to apply the same approach to it, is that we need to realise, you know, how are we assessing it? What is the level of service we're trying to maintain? And how much work is required to renew the network to maintain it at that level? And I just don't think we've applied that. And I know that Adrian and his team have done the same around the trail network, for instance. And we know that even though the amount of money available for renewals on the trail network was only $100,000 or $180,000 a year in the Upper Clutha, the answer is actually $450,000 or $550,000 because they've done the work, they know how much it would take to maintain it. So I think we just need to be more objective. I don't think we should be making choices. We should be just applying the same.
So we do, but what I would say is the outputs are probably driven by the ability to get funding from NZTA. And if you at a governance group say, actually, we are prepared, it's important enough to invest in our pathways, that you are happy to invest at an unsubsidised level, then we can adjust those levers. So we've got all that information. We do regular inspections of all our pathways. We model them. We can actually project how much we would need. But what we've been doing is taking this balanced approach with a affordability lens to say, actually, as a service delivery organisation, we can take more risk by allowing them to fail a little bit.
Well,
but that's
I disagree with that principle. I don't think we should be taking more risk and letting them fail. I think we should be applying the same criteria. Their infrastructure, we should be applying the same infrastructure tools to them that we apply to the roading, and it's as simple as that. I don't think we should be devaluing them by making those decisions to say they're less important or less.
I think we apply the same approach to
Well,
growth.
I
We also deprioritise things that don't get
I know that's
NZTA
what
funding
we've
to
said.
growth.
I don't think we have applied that same
Quite a
approach.
few of them cleared a citizenship ceremony in the not too distant time. So we are going to have to wrap up, otherwise as well get a break for the rest of the day. So, but the points are well made, and I think they'll come back in the options that come back to us in terms of the project list. Some I'm sure.
This is actually really important that we get direction on this, because the entire renewals program is set around a balanced approach, and that is tagged to the NZTA funding model. So if you want us to model something different to bring back at the next stage, more in the option 3 space, then that is important direction that we need, or even if it's not fully option 3, but if you want us to not adjust it by NZTA funding levers.
Well, I think what I've heard is that sort of how do we make sure that we're doing the active transport network well, which would imply probably a higher level than the balanced approach. That's what I've heard.
Yeah.
Then the consequence of that is something that needs to come back.
Yeah,
But it might be a targeted hybrid option.
Yeah, I agree. I think sitting in that balance approach, partly because we are constrained by what the funding allows us to do for much of this. But I haven't seen any mention here or heard it in relation to retaining and enhancing over time, because demand will increase for horse trails as well as bike trails. So, you know, it is something that needs to be built into the system, particularly after a good rate.
But noting we're actually talking about renewals,
Yes.
Yeah.
and asset management rather than new stuff.
That's
Yeah.
So I think we're going to come, we'll need to do some thinking on the option that we model here, and probably just confirm that what it is before we take it to the next stage. But I think Ian needs to talk to you about something.
Just the very last slide.
Oh, the last slide, sorry. Penny, I think you're doing to refer back to the chat as well, so we can put some thoughts in from her perspective.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so this will literally only be 30 seconds, but I just did want to draw your attention to the fact that obviously we've got an infrastructure strategy take 2 workshop next week, and then transport on the 14th of July, but mainly I wanted to draw your attention to steering group 8 which we've extended the time period for. And that's to accommodate a really decent amount of time with the person that's undertaking the rating review for us, Philip. And a big chunk of that workshop is going to be walking through every single service that the council provides and walking through the methodology of determining ultimately who should pay. So it's a really meaty workshop. Yeah, so we've allowed 4 hours for that, and then we'll also close off the activity plan. So just we will feed you on that day. That was the main thing I just wanted to bring your attention to.
One other thing, we did talk a little bit about the Forge Road natural hazards situation. You've actually got a workshop on the 21st of July to find an update. That's coming to you.
Nikki, you've got a final question, is it? You're on mute.
Sorry, just a quick question on the rating impact workshop. Will we have sufficient time? It'll be quite complicated. Will that person be providing us with some information that they're talking to?
Nikki, it's not a one and done. There'll be a whole series of workshops around the rating.
Okay.
And yes, it will be very detailed. And this, we had a conversation with Philip last week. There's nothing about ratings models in New Zealand that he doesn't know. So I think you'll find it really, really interesting. I'll find out from Catherine if we can have any pre-circulated materials. That there will be time to
there is.
That would be great. Who is it, guys? Are you able to tell us? Oh.
For us as councillors to go into that workshop thinking about what are the outcomes? Yeah. You know, what are the outcomes we want to nail? And then we've got some that tells how we can achieve it. One of the things being, I think, yeah, I think so. So that's your homework. Bring your, what do we think we need to achieve? That review. Otherwise, it's a white.
I think that first workshop is all around vision and outcomes.
Yeah. Brilliant. Cool. Great job. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was fun.
Cool. Well done, guys. Thanks. That was really helpful.
Cheers.
So Penny, how do we compare to previously?